The center of this world, about which the story will go, is stones, and without them the life of people was simply impossible. Water was purified with shunting ore, and people also got electricity from tourmaline. However, there was one kind of stone that has fascinated people since time immemorial. An unknown man picked up a precious red stone and examined it against the sky. Somewhere underground was a hoggy village that was quite noisy. A certain man shouted that it was working. The girl sighed heavily and said that it was a real relief. The artisan replied that he had just increased the brightness of the tourmaline, so he had to remember to fix the mechanical parts. The girl handed the man some coins and admitted that she was embarrassed to pay the ore artisan with such change. But the man smiled and said it was no big deal. The ore artisan was a man named Isekai'd. He said he stopped here just to gather provisions and silver, so he thought they were doing him a favor. The other villagers asked the man to fix their sign, for iron was also ore. Isekai'd gladly agreed. As Isekai'd set to work, an old woman came up to him and told him that he didn't have to do it at all. But the guy asked her not to be silly. They were ore artisans and specialized in processing ore and using its properties, and that was their job. Isekai'd used his magic, after which his hands were covered in glow. He leaned his hands on the signboard, after which it glowed. One of the locals lifted the signboard above his head and exclaimed that it was amazing because it was as good as new. One of the boys thought it was rather dull, for they should have just made the metal shiny. A disgruntled woman, apparently his mother, ordered him to shut up. Isekai'd leaned over the boy and said that in that case he would show him something more impressive. The artisan asked the boy to hold one thing, and all the boys in the neighborhood's mouths dropped open in amazement. It was the gem, and his mother asked him not to drop it. Isekai'd said that gemstones hid mystical powers that could not be found in other ores. For example, it was ruby, and when the red stone was heated, it began to glow brightly. Isekai'd put his hand up and heated the gemstone. He smiled and said that this was how it revealed its depth and power. Everyone around him was thrilled, and the boy shouted that it was cool. No one knew that Isekai'd could turn stones into jewels, and the children asked him to show them his earring. Isekai'd touched his earring and said he couldn't give it to them. It was some sort of proof that he was an ore artisan and he would be in trouble if he lost it. At the same time, somewhere in the depths of the caves, there were gem collecting activities going on. A young lad held out a couple gems to the man and said that this was his loot for the day. It was pretty good, and the man thought the guy really had a flair for diamonds and gave him his proceeds. The guy counted it, but he didn't think it was enough. But the man asked him not to show off, for he was kind enough to hire him with such a leg and considered himself lucky. The children that ran past them spread rumors that the ore tinker from the surface had come to them. It was definitely him, as he had a tinker's earring with a large ruby, which interested the young lad. The man the boy worked for said that it was rare to find such artisans here. The boy started mumbling something about the earring, and the man asked the Kai what he was talking about. The Kai that worked for the man was a simple village boy. He clutched his money in his hands and thought about the red ruby earring of the artisan. Isekai'd had already managed to get himself a good amount of loot and decided that he needed somewhere to eat before he started digging. No sooner had he thought about it than someone called out to him. It was a Kai who wanted to make sure that he was indeed an ore tinker. He said that there had been a landslide near him and asked for his help. Isekai'd immediately asked the guy where the landslide happened, and the Kai said he would show him. When the tinker followed the guy, a smile appeared on the Kai's face. They walked deeper and deeper into the mines, and Isekai'd noticed that they had been walking for quite some time. Kai replied that they didn't have far to go. The artisan thought about the fact that this mine was quite wide, but he still didn't like it. Suddenly a Kai crept up on him from behind and pushed him into the pit in front of them. With terrified screams, Isekai'd fell inside and fell down. He shouted to the Kai that all jokes have a limit. Kai asked if he had really come to their village 3 years ago. Isekai'd looked up at the guy in surprise, not knowing what he was talking about. The artisan replied that it was his first time here, and seeing that the Kai was about to shut him down, asked him to wait. But the fellow did not listen to him and locked Isekai'd in a dark pit. Isekai'd knocked and asked him to open up. He thought it was quite dark and cramped. Kai couldn't stand it and yelled that he hadn't forgotten that ruby earring with 3 crossed lines. But Isekai'd yelled that it wasn't him and Kai was mistaken. Isekai'd asked to open it because his eyesight was poor, plus he was afraid of the dark and claustrophobic. As soon as he thought about it, he started to faint and fell down. After a while, Isekai'd regained consciousness and opened his eyes. Not realizing what was happening, he crouched down on his knees and saw Kai in front of him. Kai didn't understand what kind of tinker he was, who was afraid of the dark and also claustrophobic. He asked the tinker to return what he had slept on as a pillow. Isekai'd handed the guy his item and asked if he had really been carrying it all this time. It was safe to say that he had been carrying it here. The craftsman obviously didn't realize that there was a tunnel in the pit, and Ikeboshi blushed with embarrassment. Kai thought he had to return one thing to him and threw his earring into the artisan's hands. Ikeboshi immediately became overwhelmed, not realizing when he had time to do that. Kai averted his gaze and apologized to him, for he had mistaken him for another person. Ikeboshi asked what Kai was looking for this ore artisan for. Kai said he was looking for him because of what he had done to his leg and family. Seeing this, Ikeboshi was shocked. When the boy took off his shoe, the artisan saw that his foot was petrified. He told the artisan that another artisan had done it, and the Kai said it was so. But the Ikeboshi did not understand how such a thing was even possible. This story happened 3 years ago. On the day that the Kai was buying food at the upper level and returning to the village, a gas-like mist appeared. All the people were disturbed and Kai didn't realize what it was. Among the people's senses were those whose skin was partially petrified. Kai panicked and ran home. His house was on the very outskirts of the village and there the fog was densest. When Kai flew into the house, he saw that his whole family had turned to stone. A man in a cloak unfamiliar to him grabbed his father's head, and the father only had time to tell his son to run away. After that, his head as well as his body petrified. Kai shouted to his father, but he was immediately grabbed by the man on whose ear he saw the earring. He lifted him above the ground and Kai's leg began to petrify. The boy heard people shouting that the guards and the rescue party were already here. The hooded man immediately threw the Kai away and turned towards the shouts. The weakened Kai asked him to stop, but the mysterious man simply disappeared into the fog. After this story, everything made sense to Ikeboshi. Kai hoped it might have told him something. After all, the man was also wearing a ruby earring with 3 lines. But nothing occurred to the artisan. The 3 lines on the stone most likely represented an asterism. A red stone with a star-shaped figure must have been ruby spinel garnets. Kai couldn't even pronounce it and apologized. Besides, he couldn't stand all those gemstones, so he didn't know much about them. The guy thought they were just rocks, but for some reason everyone was going crazy over the fact that they were a bit shiny. For a Kai, it was pretty stupid. Ikeboshi thought that was probably one point of view and held out his kit to the Kai. The artisan thought the Kai should look at it himself and showed him the box that held the various gems. Kai stared at the box of gems in surprise. Ikeboshi said that when he was a child, he once got lost in a mine. It was so dark and cramped that he became very scared. But then he found an uncut ruby. His heart beat so joyfully that he forgot his fear altogether. Ikeboshi was madly happy to find such a fiery red stone in a pile of dirt. The artisan pointed out another stone as well. It was lapis lazuli, which looked like the night sky. Also aquamarine, which looked like ocean blue. And tourmaline had a gradation he had never seen before, as if the whole world was gathered in it. And it was mesmerizing. But the most impressive was another stone. Ikeboshi picked it up and held it out to Kai right in his face, in a way that made the boy twitch with fear. It was the only stone capable of awakening a brilliance in people and their techniques. This brilliance is a miracle created between nature and man. But on the whole, Kai was not wrong when he said that a terrible war was fought over these stones. However, Ikeboshi believed that these were the sins of humans alone. After all, the gems themselves could do nothing to them, and the artisan didn't think they could be at fault in any way. Barely had the Kai opened his mouth to reply when suddenly there was an eerie rumbling sound from Ikeboshi's stomach and he fell silent. The guy barely contained his laughter and smiled. He said it happened just at the most interesting part and asked for permission to make amends for his misunderstanding. The heroes came to a store that smelled quite good even from the outside. Ikeboshi was amazed and sat down on a rock waiting for the Kai. Ikeboshi waited for quite some time, but the doors of the store opened and the Kai apologized to him for waiting. His both hands were busy with plates of food. The thing was, there was a big commotion in the store and they had to help them out a bit. Ikeboshi looked at the fried rice with surprise and exclaimed that it looked quite delicious. Kai showed Ikeboshi his work and the artisan thought it was impressive. Kai had a part-time job at this place, so it was just a cost of the profession. He apologized to the artisan for it being staff food, but Ikeboshi asked him not to be silly. It was more than enough for him. Ikeboshi closed his eyes in pleasure. This food was quite tasty and it had an exquisite balance of salt and meat. Kai smiled and said that his facial expression gave him away. Ikeboshi noticed Kai's huge portion and thought it might have been a bit much for him. The artisan didn't believe the Kai could have eaten it all by himself. The boy stuffed his cheeks, after which he told Ikeboshi that he was thinking about something. The thing was that the Kai had never been to the surface and asked if the artisan had stones the same color as the sky. Also the stone he had shown him earlier, which was the color of the ocean. He wanted to see them again, which made Ikeboshi very happy. His eyes lit up with happiness and his face spread into a smile. He happily agreed with him and asked him to think about it for a while. He said that the sky came in many colors, even red like a ruby. Kai was surprised that the sky could be that color. Ikeboshi knew that this child was just trying to seem like an adult, but in reality he was just like all children. Their lunch was interrupted by the cook, who called out to the Kai and told him that his shift was coming up. He didn't realize what the kid had set up outside his store, and the artisan apologized to them. Kai got upset and thought it was time for him to start. Ikeboshi told the guy that he could show him the stones tomorrow if he wanted, and Kai lit up with happiness. Ikeboshi smiled and replied then he had nowhere to rush anyway. In parting, the Kai said that his work would be here again tomorrow, so he asked to wait for him here at noon. Ikeboshi agreed with the Kai, and the boy remembered something else. Kai remembered that he still hadn't introduced himself and gave his name, which translated meant ashes. Ikeboshi also introduced himself and said that the translation of his name meant Scarlet Star. Kai said that was cool and said goodbye to the artisan until tomorrow. The artisan smiled and thought that he hadn't heard such words for him in a long time. As the Kai left, a man approached the Ikeboshi. He was obviously looking for the ore artisan who was always hiding from him. It was a lowly lord of the village named Hagi Sabia. He smiled and shook Ikeboshi's hand. It was quite a welcome, and Ikeboshi also greeted the lord of that village. The lord of Hagi village had already heard that the lad was excavating gems, and Ikeboshi confirmed it. In that case, the lord felt he certainly had something to tell him and asked the artisan to bend over. He quietly told the artisan in his ear that a red diamond had been found in their village. Ikeboshi couldn't stand it and exclaimed, but the lord asked him to be quieter, and the artisan immediately covered his mouth with his hands. It was the rarest, most valuable of all colored diamonds. Even 1 carat of this marvelous stone was worth 1 million. The lord didn't even have time to finish before Ikeboshi said he would like to see him at any cost. When that was settled, the lord smiled and said he would bring him to him tomorrow. The happy Ikeboshi said goodbye to the lord of the village, unable to believe his good fortune. He immediately thought it was worth inviting the Kai and was sure he would like it. The next day the artisan came to the same place and apologized to the Kai for keeping him waiting. He looked at the boy and asked if he was alright. Kai smiled and said he was fine. It was just that his left leg was a little sore. But that happened quite often. Ikeboshi noticed that the boy had made him lunch again. Kai replied that he had already eaten his portion, so the tinker could take it. A joyful Ikeboshi told the Kai that he had met the lord of the village yesterday. He said he would show him a super rare diamond and offered to let Kai see it with him. Kai's face changed dramatically and he got to his feet, but Ikeboshi didn't realize what was wrong with him. Suddenly Kai waved his hand and the plate of rice fell to the ground with a clatter. The shocked Ikeboshi stared at his lunch and didn't understand why he did it. Kai shouted at the artisan. He exclaimed that the Ikeboshi was just like all those idiots. Kai tore away from the Ikeboshi, but the uncomprehending tinker jumped up from his seat and tried to stop him. Ikeboshi ran after the Kai, who ran straight into the depths of the mine. Out of fear, the artisan stopped in front of the entrance. It was a rather dark and narrow space, but Ikeboshi assured himself that he could do it and ran after the Kai. Once downstairs, an entire settlement appeared in front of the Ikeboshi, but there was no one here. The artisan assumed the Kai lived here and saw a light in one of the houses. The doors of the house were open and Ikeboshi noticed a boy lying on the doorstep. He immediately rushed to the Kai's aid. When Ikeboshi ran up to the boy, he wanted to make sure he was okay, but noticed that the Kai was writhing in pain. He asked the Kai to show him his leg, but the Kai resisted and asked him to stop and not touch him. But Ikeboshi thought that Kai should have stopped panicking and suggested that his skin was on fire. While Ikeboshi was trying to help the boy, he heard the Lord's voice behind him. The man smiled and told the tinker that he couldn't find him anywhere, and it looked as if they had gotten here before them. Ikeboshi froze in place with shock, and the Lord wanted to ask the artisan for his opinion. The petrified leg of the Kai was the very red diamond that Ikeboshi could not believe. The Lord smirked and said that was not all. The older the Kai got, the larger the crystal became. Year after year, the stone also grew, so its value was also extraordinary. The Lord looked at the shocked Ikeboshi, waiting for him to answer. Lord assumed that the artisan had doubts about its preservation. The Kai used to be locked in this room and the stone grew slowly, so they thought they should have put it to work, and it looked like the walking was contributing to the quality. The Lord's bald subordinate grabbed the Kai, but the boy clung to his arms and asked him to let go. Ikeboshi asked the Lord to let go of the Kai and stop. The Lord smiled and admitted that he had another product he wanted to show him. Of course, it wasn't as valuable as this diamond, but the Lord had something that would amaze Ikeboshi with its size and variety. Ikeboshi didn't understand anything, and the Kai shouted at the Lord, demanding that he stop all this. The boy tried to get out and resist, but the Lord's subordinate covered his mouth with his hands. The Lord rummaged in his pocket and opened the door of the room. He asked the Ikeboshi to consider adding them to his collection if it would not trouble him. Ikeboshi was horrified when he saw the entire Kai family turn to stone. They were covered with ruby, sapphire, and emerald. The artisan did not understand how such a variety of gems could mix together. Tears appeared in the Kai's eyes, and he once again tried to free himself from the man's grip. Ikeboshi asked not to be told that the Lord himself had a hand in this, but the Lord spread his arms and asked not to make him laugh, for he had come here already after they were petrified. He bought and sold jewelry, so his caravan passed by. As soon as the locals found out that he traded in stones, they immediately brought him here. They begged him to buy the whole family, but Ikeboshi found that hard to believe. The Lord walked over to the Kai and smirked. He thought it was a rather sad story, selling out others to save himself. But that wasn't all it was. People had no idea that the Kai was a red diamond. No one had any idea that people would sell it for nothing just to get away from here. The Lord grabbed the guy by the hair and said it was a real pity. None of these people realized the value, not even Kai himself. Kai believed the Lord when he told him he would free him once he paid him for his family and for the red diamond. And Kai blindly followed that dream. The Lord ordered the lad to listen to him and took the Kai by the hair. The stone he hated so much was worth so much that he would never save enough money in his whole life to buy it. Kai couldn't take it anymore and spat angrily right in the face of the Lord, who at first didn't realize anything. He touched his wet cheek. The Lord slapped the guy's cheek with all his might, not realizing what he was doing. The craftsman wanted to help Kai, but a muscular man grabbed him and stopped him. Kai fell to the floor and the angry Lord stepped on the guy with his foot. The Lord felt that the Kai should be grateful to him and the stone. After all, the reason he was still alive was because of the stone. And without that stone, he would have nothing to fight for. The Lord kicked Kai in the back again and shouted that Kai wouldn't have saved anyone anyway. Gritting his teeth in grief, Kai listened to the Lord's cries through his tears. He shouted that the Kai couldn't solve anything until someone hit him and leveled him with a mere dirty stone. At some point, the boy's petrified leg began to glow, and the boy screamed. The crystals from his foot began to grow instantly, forming sharp spikes. Kai screamed for all he was worth as the crystal turned into a huge clump and almost hit the Lord with it. Ikeboshi didn't know how to help the boy and only watched in horror. The Lord jumped aside, not realizing what was happening. His ring on his finger crunched, and as soon as the Lord noticed it, his face broke into a smile. He motioned for his handmaiden to take a look at it. His stone instantly became a diamond, and the shocked man turned toward the sprawling crystal. Ikeboshi realized that he had overheated. Apparently Kai's power was to turn stone into diamond. Kai had no control over his power, and if this continued, things would get very bad. The Lord shouted to his handmaiden that the Kai could turn his family into sand and asked him to stop him. He also allowed him to cut off his leg if necessary, and the man obeyed the order. The man swung his katana at the boy, but the Ikeboshi rushed to his aid and covered him with his body. The artisan hugged the Kai and thought he was very hard and scared. Kai hugged Ikeboshi and wept. At that moment, the katana slid down the artisan's back. Ikeboshi didn't care and told the guy that Kai handled it well. The artisan left the Kai his earring and asked him to explain everything to the people later. He had to ask for help. Ikeboshi asked the Kai not to worry, for there was a big world out there. The artisan was sure there was someone there to help him and smiled. The wounded artisan rose to his feet and prepared his katana under his cloak. He was sure they wouldn't make a deal with Mr. Sabia because the Lord was a blind fool. Ikeboshi gripped his katana and thought of the boy that was abandoned, betrayed, and used. Other than that, he still lived for his family. The artisan was amazed at how this boy lived, his decisions, and his life. The Lord and his men thought it was all duller than a red stone. With those words, the artisan drew his flaming katana from its sheath. The artisan shouted that they completely misunderstood the true value, and the Kai stared in surprise at the Ikeboshi, which looked completely different. The flames from the katana turned into a huge blazing ball that struck everything in the neighborhood. The Lord began rolling on the ground and screaming that he was very hot. He saw that the artisan had a dark red blade in his hands. It was an ore craftsman's weapon with gems inside, and it was called a ruby sword. The Lord turned to his underling and ordered him to bring the very thing. The man wasn't sure what it was, but the Lord ordered him to be silent and carry out the order. As his handmaiden ran off, the Lord smirked and thought that Ikeboshi only had the ruby, so he didn't stand a chance. But the Lord's smile immediately vanished when his man's katana slammed right between his legs into the ground. Ikeboshi stripped him of his handy weapon and swung his sword. Ikeboshi thought it was a bad thing. He had lost too much blood and could no longer fight. The Lord got to his feet and noticed that apparently the tinker's strength was running low. The Lord raised his hand and exclaimed that the Ikboshi would now fall into despair, and the artisan raised his head in terror. Mr. Savia summoned his stone beast with diamond fangs and cried out that his beast was indestructible unlike his wretched ruby. The artisan smirked and thought that this guy had bad taste, then fell to his knees. But he was quite surprised when the Kai covered him with himself. The artisan did not realize what he was doing, for he had previously ordered him to run away. But the Kai did not think of doing so, for he was overjoyed. He was glad when Ikboshi told him about the surface and protected him, so he asked not to tell him such things. Besides, Ikboshi promised to tell him more about the surface. The surprised artisan smiled and admitted that he was right, for he had made him a promise. Ikboshi rose to his feet and asked the Kai to lend him his power for a while. The artisan suggested to the Kai to fight together in that case, and the lad supported him. The Lord tisked unhappily and said that it would hurt him to lose the red diamond seed. He ordered the diamond lion to deal with them and decided that they would only keep the leg. Kai doubted his strength, but Ikboshi smiled and told him not to worry about anything. He swung his sword and said they would handle it somehow. Kai didn't understand what he meant. Ikboshi caught the moment of the lion's jump and asked Kai to act now. Kai tried to concentrate on Ikboshi's blade and change it with his power. The guy shouted and ordered to turn that blade into a diamond, whereupon the Ikboshi blade was indeed covered in red crystal. Ikboshi pierced the lion with his blade, which was reinforced with a ruby diamond. He applied the joint radiance flash skill, after which the attacking beast was cut in two. At the same moment, a large bright flame erupted and engulfed the beast. When it was over, the flames began to fade and the surprised Kai saw in the midst of the puffs of smoke the creature they had defeated. Kai heard the Ikboshi fall to the ground and rushed to his aid. The artisan smiled at the lad and admitted that he would never have won with only one ruby. He thanked the Kai for saving him, but noticed that there was something wrong with the Kai. Kai replied that he was just thinking. The stones he hated so much had saved them today. But Ikboshi perked up and reminded him of what he had said earlier. The stones could just exist and couldn't be guilty of anything. Kai smiled sadly and thought he was right. The boy assumed that he could have become as strong as Ikboshi, and then he would be able to find that man with the red earring with 3 lions to find out how to cure his family. The artisan stared in surprise at the Kai, who fell to his knees and begged the Ikboshi to do so. Kai begged Ikboshi, then he would make him his apprentice. At that very moment, the artisan felt that he had once been the same. Ikboshi asked the Kai to give him back the earring that the Kai had already forgotten. The boy took the earring out of his pocket and held it out in Ikboshi's hands. The artisan smiled and thanked the Kai for the earring. The frustrated Kai lowered his gaze, but then he felt his ear become heavy. Ikboshi had forgotten to tell him something. When an ore artisan had an apprentice, it was tradition for him to entrust his earring to his apprentice. Ikboshi smiled at the surprised Kai who touched the earring on his ear. At that moment, the artisan's heart leaped with joy. He was so excited when he found the fiery red stone in a pile of dirt. Just like then, he wanted to see that glow more and more. That was exactly what Ikboshi was thinking at that moment. With excitement and pain in his leg, Kai fell on the teacher and Ikboshi asked him to hold on. Thus the fate of teacher and student had just begun. Sometime in the past, Kai drew pictures with colored pencils and marveled that the sky could really be that color. His mother was going through things and noticed that her family was having quite a bit of fun. The boy's father smiled and explained to his wife that he had been asked to draw a landscape from the surface. The woman was delighted with his drawing and remembered that he had once led a geological survey there. The man got embarrassed and said it was just once. Kai turned to his sister Haku and suggested that she see the world outside when they grew up. Haku was delighted by this suggestion and agreed with her brother. Kai placed the petrified bodies of his parents and the frightened Haku on the bed and covered them with a blanket. He asked his sister to wait for him a little longer. He bent over the girl and promised that her older brother would cure her. He also looked at the mother and father. The hero promised his parents that he would surely come back for them. When Kai opened the doors of the house, he noticed a teacher who was splashing something incomprehensible on some scroll with notes. Ikboshi smiled and assumed the guy was done with saying goodbye. Kai grudgingly asked the teacher what he was doing in front of his house, but the tinker smiled and said it was just a security measure. Kai didn't know what he meant, but Ikboshi didn't think Kai would want to leave his family for nothing. So Ikboshi decided to make a stone cage. After he finished with the writing, he folded the seal in his hands and his hands were covered in flames. At one point, Kai jumped on the spot as huge crystals broke through from the ground and surrounded his house. Kai was shocked that these stones grew as if out of nowhere. The artisan shook off his hands and said that with the right ingredients and conditions it wasn't that hard. Kai wondered what the stone was called and Ikboshi replied that it was an Antarcticide. A surprised Kai reached out to it and noticed that it looked like ice. Ikeboshi warned him in time and told him that if he touched this crystal he would immediately turn to ice. The boy immediately took his hands off of it and realized why it was a safety measure. In addition, barely had he gotten his hand near it, the crystal began to crack and grow in his direction, warning him not to touch it. Ikeboshi threw something in the guy's hands and said it was for him. Kai barely caught it and said it was too close to the rock. Ikeboshi smiled and said it was a cool catch. Kai opened the thing and asked what it was. In his hands was an ulexite that had the ability to refract light. Ikeboshi improved the stone and split it in two, and now Kai could transfer the image of one stone to the other. This way he could see his family whenever he wanted. Kai stared at the thing in delight and admitted that he didn't know such stones existed. But then the hero sighed heavily and came to his senses. He waved his head and tried not to be happy, because he didn't come here to have fun. He needed to heal his parents, and Kai had to do whatever it took to save them. Ikeboshi heard him and asked him what he was about. It was so unexpected for the Kai that he jumped up on the spot with fright. He nudged the teacher forward and offered to go, but Ikeboshi wanted to know from him what about the tearful farewell to his family. The guy exclaimed that he wasn't going to do that, and he wasn't going to also say goodbye to his boss from work at all. Of course, the hero always wanted to get out of here, but climbing the stairs with one foot wasn't so easy. Ikeboshi asked the guy if he was okay. The teacher suggested that the Kai would like to ride on his back, but the boy was adamantly against it. Besides, he was already 15 years old. He did not consider himself small and was capable of walking on his own. Kai stopped and offered to walk without him, and after a rest he would catch up with him himself. While the teacher was considering this, Kai pointed his finger forward and asked if there really was an exit there. Ikeboshi remembered that this was his first time going to the surface, and the Kai agreed with him. Ikeboshi pushed the Kai forward and said that in that case it should be a memorable first step. The hero stubbed his toes and asked not to be pushed. At that moment, he remembered the words of his sister who wanted to go out there with her older brother. Kai mentally apologized to his sister and promised her that one day they would go out there together. Covering his eyes from the bright light, Kai stepped forward and looked around. His eyes quickly got used to the bright light and he exclaimed that it was cool. Also, the color of the sky was exactly the same as his father had told him. The hero immediately noticed a large stone in the shape of a dragon's head and asked about it. Ikeboshi had managed to forget that the Kai had seen it for the first time. This dragon was built when a huge ancient creature was petrified. It was said that the power of ore and gems belonged to this dragon. Kai was shocked by this and the artisan blushed. He became embarrassed and asked Kai if he was really like the teacher. In truth, the Kai was his first student and he didn't know much about how to teach. Ikeboshi decided to be honest about it. He asked the guy if he could teach him how to teach him. Kai was shocked, not knowing what he was talking about. Kai assumed that Ikeboshi could teach him exactly the same way he had been taught, and the tinker hesitated to answer. The fact was that he had absolutely no recollection of how he had been taught. It became unclear to Kai what his studies were. Ikeboshi asked the boy how he learned to cook. Kai thought about it and said he learned it by just repeating. He was shown an example, and then when he did things on his own, he had to realize what he was doing right and what he was doing wrong. Ikeboshi exclaimed that he understood, but the Kai was beginning to doubt that he had chosen the right teacher. The artisan then offered to show him how to use the method, but the Kai didn't understand what he meant. The ground around him shook and Kai was frightened, not realizing what was happening. The ground in front of Kai began to shake and crack, then collapsed downward. Right under their feet appeared a huge living dragon that looked at Kai. Kai jumped aside and screamed that they would be eaten alive, but his teacher came to the boy's rescue and picked up Kai. Before the hero could thank Ikeboshi, he noticed that they were flying. Ikeboshi explained to the student that it's all because of the neodymium magnets he put in his shoes. They are a very strong diamagnetic ore. The artisan increased their diamagnetism, so the repulsion from the magnets on the ground allowed them to fly. Kai was surprised and said that this explanation was like the teacher. Ikeboshi blurted out a smile, but Kai asked him to look ahead. A huge dragon opened its mouth right in front of the heroes and was about to devour them. But Ikeboshi threw a small kunai into the water nearby and used a boost. Stone pillars immediately grew from under the water and hit the dragon. The huge dragon destroyed the pillars and the Kai exclaimed that it didn't work. In that case, the artisan decided to use another trick. He landed on a piece of earth that sprouted from a rock and hit the dragon in the jaw. But on impact, the rock began to crumble. Then Ikeboshi stuck another kunai into the ground and used fire. The cliff of earth turned into several sharp shards and pierced the dragon, causing the creature to fall to the ground. Kai watched this battle in amazement and he thought he was slowly beginning to realize what the ore craftsman's stone manipulation ability meant. There were two main types of manipulation: using the natural properties of the stone, such as magnetism, and altering the stone itself. Kai also noticed an aquamarine ring on Ikeboshi's hand. Kai realized how the artisan used the power of the gemstones. With the power of the aquamarine, Ikeboshi created a water wave that enveloped the body of the resisting monster. At the snap of a finger, the Kai teacher used tourmaline, through which he was able to summon lightning. The monster's body was enveloped by a lightning discharge. As soon as the dragon stopped moving, Ikeboshi and the Kai in his hands landed on the ground. As they got closer, the Kai noticed that the monster had turned to sand. Ikeboshi reached for a small pebble on the ground and said that this is the most exciting part of destroying monsters. Ikeboshi glowed with happiness and leaned against the pebble. Artisans lived only to collect stones from fossilized beasts. Kai said it was essentially his calling. The artisan told Kai that this was his example and now it was his turn. But Kai didn't understand what he meant. A terrible rumbling sound was heard behind him. The nearby rock began to crumble and a similar monster emerged from it. Ikeboshi stepped aside from the guy and asked his student to try his best to defeat it. As soon as the monster struck its huge club in front of the guy's face, the Kai became scared and drops of sweat started coming off his face. Screaming as he ran away from the monster catching up with him, Kai wailed that he had definitely chosen the wrong teacher. Kai tried to think of what to do, and decided that even if he turned it into a diamond, nothing would change. But the hero thought for a second and said that this monster would become a stone. That was exactly what he was aiming for. Kai stopped and turned to face the monster. The guy aimed his hand at the monster's club and said that he would get it. But he came out rather pathetic, and the monster's baton was only slightly covered by a diamond shard. Kai had to dodge the monster again while his teacher just silently watched the whole thing from the side. The ore artisan used his energy and channeled power to unleash the hidden power of the stone and change its shape. But with gemstones it was different. In order to release its power, one had to tune into the direction of the stone's power. It was hard to tune into it. Thus Ikeboshi used the release of the element of fire. The direction of the force could be honed by training. The attunement depended on compatibility and talent. Ikeboshi thought that Kai wasn't that strong, but the fact that he could use it only meant that he was a great student. Eventually the Kai caught his foot and fell to the ground. When he turned his head, he saw the monster about to strike him and screamed. The guy quickly jumped up and ran to the dead end, not knowing what he should do next. The hero had to think quickly and decide how he would deal with such damage. But at some point, Kai looked at his hand in surprise and thought about being cornered. The craftsman watched the guy from up high and already thought it was time for him to give up. Ikeboshi was surprised that the Kai started turning the wall near him into a diamond and didn't realize what he was up to. Kai turned around and saw the monster ready to hit him with his huge club. Ikeboshi thought this was his limit and held his katana at the ready to protect his student. But Kai pointed his hand at the monster and shouted that now he would get what he deserved. The artisan watched in amazement as the boy created a rock under the monster's feet. The creature stumbled, dropped the club from his hands, and fell to the ground. Its huge carcass fell almost on top of the Kai, but the hero bounced aside in time. Kai looked at the defeated monster. It seemed to him that it was painful to fall on that spot. But the hero raised his fist above his head and said that he had won. His victory didn't last long and Kai quickly let go of his hand. The monster came to his senses and turned towards Kai, but Ikeboshi defended his student and used Ruby Breakthrough. Ikeboshi smiled at Kai and exclaimed that it was a good job. Before he could say anything, the Kai fell to the ground, startling Ikeboshi. But the craftsman quickly calmed down when he realized that the boy had simply fallen asleep. More specifically, he had passed out. Ikeboshi told the Kai that it was a good job. After a while, the hero came to his senses and opened his eyes. He didn't realize where he was and it didn't look like his home. The house where he woke up was a mess. Kai looked out the door and called out to his teacher. But as soon as the hero opened the doors, a cool wind blew in. Kai wondered what kind of place this was. The house he woke up in was located on a very real big turtle, and Kai had even more questions. The turtle's head turned to Kai and noticed that he was already awake. Kai didn't understand how this turtle could talk to him. Ikeboshi landed on the turtle's head and was happy that the hero was already awake. The teacher hoped that Kai hadn't hurt himself anywhere. He told the Kai that this was his transportation and buddy and home, and the old turtle man's name was Bao. Kai was surprised at how many strange creatures there were here. Ikeboshi almost forgot to give Kai his first award and held it out in the boy's hands. The hero's eyes glistened as he took the diamond of a petrified beast in his hands. Kai was thrilled with his first award and the Ikeboshi was happy for him. Ikeboshi told Kai that he was not just a stone that could not fight back. Kai stared at the teacher and remembered the words the village lord had said to him earlier. He called the guy a dirty stone, that he wasn't capable of solving anything. Hiboshi looked up at the sky and told the Kai that he could do what he wanted. The artisan was surprised when the Kai lowered his head and called himself a terrible person. After all, he had abandoned his parents and Haku in a dark and lonely place. Wiping his tears, the boy said he couldn't be happy. Hiboshi didn't understand him and didn't see anything wrong with it. But the tinker was sure it was better for the Kai to know that. Would his family really call him a terrible person knowing the fact that he was happy? A picture of his happy family appeared in front of Kai's eyes and he patted himself sharply on the head, which startled Isekai'd. Kai turned to him and had something to say. His voice sounded uncertain at first, but then he thanked Isekai'd for everything. The teacher smiled at Kai, after which the bow told the tinker that they had reached their destination. The heroes reached the center of the Ore Tinkers, the Mining Federation. Kai was amazed that there were also cities on the surface, plus it was protected by a pile of rocks. Isekai'd said that this is where they would start investigating about the man with the 3-row earring, which surprised Kai. Kai almost forgot about the fact that he wasn't supposed to lose his head after seeing only one stone beast. The hero was ready for it and said that one day he would find the man. Isekai'd was very hungry and they needed somewhere to eat. But Kai thought it was worth cleaning the place up first. So, with a fiery heart, the hero entered this new world. The hero didn't understand why he shouldn't have used the power to turn stones into diamonds. Besides, they would become sand anyway. The basic principles of the power of gemstones was to unleash their hidden potential. But the power of Kai was completely different. Transforming physical material into something completely different was an unusual gift. In the Federation, the use of this power was forbidden to all but special artisans. In that case, the Kai didn't understand why he could use this power. He barely thought about it as he slipped and flew down. Isekai'd crouched next to the fallen hero and said that he could use this power because of the red diamond in his body. Kai was well attuned to gems unlike other tinkers. Hiboshi didn't know what kind of strain this ability had on him and asked to understand it. In that case, he suggested that Kai continue practicing with these magnetic boots. Kai assumed there was some kind of trick here. Thou called out to them and told them that they had arrived at the place. They finally made it to the Mine Federation. Kai was thrilled at how huge it was and Isekai'd said that this was just a part of it. Kai assumed that since this city was on the surface, it must have been attacked by stone monsters and the teacher offered to explain it to him. There was a certain wavelength that the beasts hated, and it came from the ore in this tower. The big cities used the same method to stay on the surface. The teacher suggested to Kai to approach this diamond, and the hero listened to the instruction of his teacher. At the same moment, the guy was startled by a sudden flash that flew into his earring, ricocheted off and hit the wall again. A limestone cave of jewels opened up in front of them. Kai asked the teacher what he was doing. Hiboshi grabbed the boy by the sleeve and said that it was pretty cramped and dark. They walked through the cave where Hiboshi saw something. It was a group of soldiers holding flashlights with light in their hands. The people recognized the artisan who was also with an apprentice. They bowed and congratulated Isekai'd on his return to the Mother Stone and Mine Federation. Once they went inside, a whole city opened up in front of the hero, which he was in awe of. It was quite crowded and everyone was minding their own business. Kai exclaimed that he had never seen machines like this before. Isekai'd said that most of the population were artisans, loaders, cutters, and also appraisers. They are the main users of these machines. Kai assumed they would be gathering information and Isekai'd thought of the bureau. It looked like he wasn't very happy about it. Isekai'd apologized and said he didn't really like this place. The audit bureau stopped all the illegal activities of the artisans, and the artisan thought they already had their eye on the guy turning people into stones. Isekai'd didn't know how to put it right and said that they were rather arrogant, or better said, pompous. Barely had he said this when a loud voice called out to Mr. Kaboshi. The boys looked up and realized that the voice was coming from somewhere above them. A certain man jumped down from a high cliff and shouted that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. After that, the man landed softly in front of the heroes. It was a short girl who looked more like a child. The girl called Ku was from the first division of the audit bureau in this place. She would have come to greet them if they had sent her a message beforehand. Isekai'd smiled at her and thought she was still just as boisterous. Kai still didn't know anything about what this bureau was and stared questioningly at the Ku. The girl also stared at the guy in surprise and asked the artisan who he was. Isekai'd introduced the guy named Kai and introduced him as his apprentice. They were the same age, so Isekai'd thought they could be friends. Before he could finish his sentence, Ku interrupted him and yelled that he must be joking. Kai didn't understand why she was making so much noise and said that her noise could make you deaf. The girl got angry and said it was just unacceptable. After all, Ikeboshi had previously refused to teach even her, and she had no idea how Ikeboshi could take such a village fool as his apprentice. Kai looked at the Ku with a smirk and asked her to repeat it. The girl noticed that his skin was like a dead man's, due to the fact that he had never been in the sun. He was also wearing old-fashioned clothes. Kai probably never washed his hair at all. Ku smiled and said he fit that description perfectly. He also acted like a tourist next to Ikeboshi and looked around confused. Therefore, she was sure that the hero was the village fool. Ikeboshi tried to bring Kai to his senses and prove that there was no shame in it. But the Kai hid his face with his hands and asked not to talk to him, for he was burning with shame. Besides, if Ikeboshi said there was nothing to be ashamed of, he also thought he was a villager. The craftsman said it wasn't, and the Ku puffed up her cheeks unhappily. She called the guy a hurtful nickname again, but Kai didn't understand why she gave him that name. Holding her staff in her hands, the Ku told the hero that she was challenging him. The artisan was shocked and asked the Ku to stop it. But the Ku's look was determined and the Kai turned to his teacher. He had an idea on how to play it off and asked Ikeboshi to buy some sweets. But Ikeboshi was worried and didn't want to leave them alone. Kai sent the teacher away on business and assured her that everything would be fine. When Ikeboshi left, Kai asked Ku why she disliked the fact that he was his student so much. The girl said that such a village fool doesn't know that. Mr. Ikeboshi was a very important man for the Mine Federation. Of those chosen as the most important man for the Ruby, he is the youngest, one of the 12 stone pillars. He also became captain of the first division of the auditor's office. Everyone coveted his flame, for it was so strong and beautiful. Everyone envied the Ikeboshi, for it was the strongest of all rubies. But Mr. Ikeboshi never wanted to take an apprentice to him. The girl cried out that Mr. Ikeboshi could not choose someone like him as his apprentice because of his perfection. Ku was sure that Mr. Ikeboshi was just feeling sorry for such a pathetic cretin. Kai muttered to himself that according to her he was pathetic, and Ku was going to show the guy how pathetic he was. She called him a derogatory nickname again. Kai pounded his fist into his palm and sent her far away with her nicknames, accepting her challenge. The hero seriously asked her to stop calling him such a hurtful nickname, but Ku offered him something worse. Meanwhile, a man was standing on one of the high towers. He was admiring the view and noticed that it was quite high up here. He paid no attention at all to the people he had defeated, who were lying under his feet. He remembered that the view was usually described as being like a picture. Ikeboshi turned his head sharply toward one of the towers and dropped the goods from his hand. The woman apologized and told the artisan what had fallen out of his hand, and Ikeboshi screamed. The rules of the boys' competition were simple. Whoever got to the bell tower first would win. All the people around started cheering for the Ku, and the guy noticed that she was quite popular here. The girl smugly said that she was pretty cool, but it seemed to Kai that the only people cheering for her were the old people. They were yelling and asking to come in for cakes again. They also had her favorite boiled dishes. Kai clarified with her that they would have a simple race, but Ku didn't see what the problem was since he was wearing magnetic shoes. With a smug smirk, Ku asked not to tell her that he didn't know how to use them. After all, even a 5-year-old could learn how to do that. The kid blushed and lied that of course he knew how to use them. Since Ku had the power of the gemstone, she was willing to give Kai a 1-minute head start. The hero frowned and said that it was a pretty good head start. The girl smiled and Kai asked her not to complain if she lost. Ku asked to speak for herself. Kai was interested in her magic whip. With a wave of it, the girl announced the start. It hit the ground and Kai ran forward, thinking that he had 1 minute. Ku raised her whip and used the tiger eye technique. Summoning the large tiger that Ku sat on, she exclaimed that Kai was fighting the best beast master of the entire bureau. The boy was shocked by the beast and the Ku suggested he hurry if he didn't want to be bitten. Kai tried to run faster, yelling that it wasn't funny. Kai didn't know what to do, because with his leg, he definitely couldn't escape from the tiger. He thought he would have to use his magnetic shoes. The boy thought it would work if he balanced himself, but as soon as the hero activated the boots he immediately fell to the ground. Kai was very embarrassed when all the people thought it was funny that it was his first time using the boots. Kai covered his face with his hands, blushing red like a tomato. Kai came to his senses and was horrified when he realized his minute was almost up. Ku looked at her stopwatch and said that his minute was already up. She commanded the yellow tiger and the beast rushed forward. The girl tried to look for the Kai, but she didn't see him anywhere. She did not expect that the Kai would trip her up and be behind her back. Kai grabbed the magnetic bungee cord and said that this way he would not lose his balance. He was running along with Ku, who didn't expect that from Kai. But suddenly the boy ran full speed into a box and the girl exclaimed that he was a fool. Meanwhile, the man at the top thought about where to start and leaned against a rock. Ikeboshi sensed something again and turned around. At the same time, the Kai became wary for some unknown reason. There was a huge explosion that sent huge blocks of stone flying at the city. One of these blocks came straight at the koi. The man who stood on the tower said that everything had to be done efficiently and watched his work. He smiled and decided to start searching for the red diamond. The explosion caused a huge stone dragon to destroy the city and attack the people. One of the guards asked the people to run away and stood in front of the stone dragon. The dragon pounced on the guard, but before it could reach its target, it was stopped by the Ikeboshi and cut the dragon with a ruby strike. The artisan then used the spiral flame skill and his sword was covered in fire. He shouted to the guard and ordered him to run away to safety, and the man listened to him. Ikeboshi guessed that some sort of barrier had been placed on the tower. The artisan mentally thought of the Kai and Ku and asked them to stay safe. Meanwhile, Kai was trying to figure out what was going on here and asked Ku for it. The huge tiger Ku grabbed the guy by his clothes and lifted him slightly off the ground. The girl ordered him to be quiet and told him she was trying to contact headquarters. Kai heard screams nearby and saw a child trying to lift his mother. His mother was injured and couldn't get up. She told the girl that she had to run away, but she wasn't going anywhere. Kai cried out in horror that they were in danger. He broke out of the tiger's jaws and ran towards them, but the Ku asked him to stop. The hero noticed another clump of earth flying at the family and thought it was bad. He mentally asked his powers to help him and thought he wouldn't make it in time. Kai jumped on the family and prayed only that it would work. Ku couldn't believe her eyes. The rubble that had fallen on this family had turned into a diamond. Kai was surprised that his strength was much greater now than it had been back then in the battle with the stone beast. The girl and her mother thanked Kai for his help and said that he had saved them. Ku pushed the hero and told them it was nothing. She also notified that the central district was now designated as an evacuation zone and asked them to proceed there. The mother carefully got up and she and her daughter walked together to the evacuation site. Ku immediately talked about the hero's ability, and the kid felt embarrassed that his ability had been figured out. Of course, the investigation bureau would have questions for him, and still, he did a good job. But she couldn't expect anything less from Mr. Ikeboshi's apprentice. Kai was surprised when she said that. On their way to the evacuation bureau, the same family encountered the mysterious man that was previously standing on the high tower. The girl's mother apologized and said that the road to the central district was in a different direction. The unknown man smiled and thanked them for their kindness and courtesy. He gave them a bow and walked past them. Immediately, the bodies of the family crackled and turned into crystal in an instant. The man smirked and called those people complete fools. The people around them froze with horror and incomprehension. This whole picture caught the eyes of Kai as well, who froze in place, staring at the unknown man. He immediately pounced on him, and grabbing him by his clothes toppled him to the ground. Kai lost his temper and yelled at the stranger, demanding his entire family back. The man adjusted his black round glasses in surprise, trying to understand him. But then he took off his glasses and showed Kai his crystal eye. He smiled and said he didn't understand why he had to do that, since they were all perfect as it was. Kai was completely confused, and the stranger replied that he was looking for someone, so he would like to ask the guy to get off of him, or else in that case, he would also become a gem. The eyes of the shocked Kai remembered the very earring of the man who turned his family into a stone. No sooner had the Kai struck the man than his arm was grabbed by the Ku's whip and thrown aside. She gave an order to the tiger and the animal pounced on the man. As the huge tiger tried to gnaw at the man, the surprised stranger put his crystalline hand in its mouth and it crunched. He was thrilled to see such a creature here, and he didn't even seem to care that he was about to be killed. The man turned the tiger into a crystal in an instant and yelled that it was pretty cool. Kai asked the girl to call someone for help, but the Ku didn't understand what he was going to do. The hero knew he would slow her down, so he decided to keep the man here. While the Ku was loitering, Kai asked her to move faster and she agreed with him. As she ran away, the girl asked him to wait for her and promised to bring back up soon. The man had already guessed that the protagonist needed something from him, and the Kai replied that he had one question. He recalled how 3 years ago he had turned his entire family to stone. The man thought about it and tried to remember what he had done 3 years ago. Kai said that he had turned his father, mother, and their daughter to stone, as well as their son's left leg. The man was still trying to remember and clarified about his left foot. Suddenly he laughed and grabbed his head. He thought this was really crazy, because there was no way he thought he would find him so quickly. Kai was puzzled that this man was looking for him. Now the stranger remembered everything and understood what Kai was talking about. Then his father stood in front of him and shouted to his mother and child to run away. It was truly horrifying to see the girl start to cry and the mother clutch her in her arms and try to calm her down. To the man, it seemed terribly funny. He had a beautiful family picture in front of him that looked very caring. The mad stranger smiled at the Kai and said that it was quite a beautiful statue. The moment he looked at the guy's leg, the crystal on Kai's leg glowed. Kai became furious that it was him, and at the same moment his power went out of control. He created huge sharp crystals in front of him in a second. Now the stranger had no doubt that it was the one he was looking for he felt that the Kai was the red diamond. The man used an anti-monite black reverse wave blade. Kai looked at the crystal wall and decided he needed to use the diamond to block that. Suddenly his crystalline leg ached madly and the guy knelt down, not realizing why this was happening right now. At the same moment, the stranger with the weapon was right in front of him and said he could see him now. The man punched the guy and grabbed his face with his crystalline hand. He advised him not to breathe, for the antimonite was poisonous. And now, as he leaned the hero against the wall, he was going to look at his crystalline foot. The man was delighted to see that it was indeed a red diamond. He admitted that he'd heard about the guy from a chubby little merchant, and Kai realized that he was talking about the very lord of the village. The man looked at the lad sympathetically and suggested that it was pretty hard for him to walk with a petrified leg, and he was doing all this to heal his parents and younger sister. He put sweat and blood into his work for that. The man speculated that Kai then found a teacher that sympathized with his sad story and went looking for him. Kai set off full of courage and excitement. The stranger smirked and said it was wonderful, plus he was lucky to be reunited with him in the end. But the man thought it was a disgrace. Usually at such a moment, the hero of the story would defeat the Demon King, but now he was captured by him. Just like then 3 years ago. The man moved closer to the guy's face and said that he hadn't changed a bit in all these 3 years. He thought that the hero was completely useless and couldn't even shout to object. The guy was on his own, and Kai thought to himself that he was right. He hadn't changed or gotten any better at anything. And yet now something had changed. The man tensed as Kai firmly grabbed his arm. Kai shouted that he was not alone now and used the power of the teacher's earring. The earring flashed with light and the hero used the ruby scarlet circle skill. The stranger stepped back, not realizing what was happening, and covered his eyes from the blinding light. At the same moment, he saw an angry Kai teacher in front of him, who asked the enemy what he was going to do with his student. Kai remembered the times when he was called a dirty rock. He wasn't particularly strong, he wasn't particularly fast, and he wasn't particularly smart. That's why he never dreamed of anything. It was very embarrassing to fail and even harder to lose hope. That's why Kai always thought the smartest thing to do would be to just let go of his dreams and give up. And yet in that moment he was able to say it so easily. In front of the guy's eyes stood his teacher, who held out his hand to him with a smile. Kai opened his eyes heavily and felt his head spinning and everything was swimming in his eyes. Kai tried to realize who was next to him and saw the Ikeboshi. The artisan turned to the Ikeboshi and smiled, apologizing for being late. The Kai was surprised at first, but then abruptly grabbed his stone leg. Ikeboshi was scared for the guy and looked at his crystal foot. He thought that maybe it was the recoil from using the red diamond. The artisan asked the Kai to breathe deeply. The gem was tuning through the artisan's mind. When his mind is calm, so is the red diamond. Ikeboshi praised the Kai, but touching the back of his head, Ikeboshi saw blood. He realized that the Kai had hit the back of his head and asked him to stay here and rest. Kai shouted to the teacher that he was the one wearing the 3-row earring, and Ikeboshi stared at the student in shock. It made sense to him and he drew his sword from its sheath. He listened to the Kai, after which he turned to their opponent. Many crystals formed around the surprised stranger and he screamed. The hero didn't understand what was wrong, for he was now completely different. The stranger scratched his head and admitted that he couldn't have thought of Ikeboshi becoming his mentor. The man smirked and said that the pigeon blood was as beautiful as ever. Ikeboshi was wary when he heard that nickname. At the same instant, an antimonite flew at him, an attack of directed fangs. Ikeboshi created a crystal ball and ordered the Kai to stay there, then began to dodge the enemy's attacks. He came closer and closer to the stranger, but the man shouted that he wasn't done yet. The artisan picked up the moment and made a sharp dash. He bounced to the side and found himself behind his opponent's back. At the same moment he wanted to strike him, but his sword was blocked by the crystals that had grown. Antimonite's durability wasn't that high. The opponent not only manipulated so much antimonite, but also synthesized silver to raise its durability. A multitude of sharp crystals rained down on Ikeboshi, which he deftly dodged. Kai didn't understand why his teacher didn't use his flame. The man thought that maybe his antimonite wasn't so shiny, but it was very poisonous. If an artisan touches it, he will burn his skin, and if an Ikeboshi set it on fire, it would spray a toxic gas. The man thought this was pretty cool and thought the tinker would agree with him. Ikeboshi took a high jump, but the crystals kept up with him. He also kept dodging them in the air like that. Kai felt strongly for his teacher, but Ikeboshi suggested that his enemy watch his step. At that moment, the ground around his enemy cracked and shook. Ikeboshi applied a ruby captivating chain of blazing light. Kai guessed that in the instant the teacher had dodged the blows, he had positioned his kunai. Ikeboshi thought that his antimonite should have weakened now, but the man asked not to be so sure. He smirked and said that this mother and child would also become sand, and Ikeboshi hesitated. Kai looked at his teacher and shouted to him. From on high, the artisan saw the people turn to stone. They had not yet crumbled after his binding, and Ikeboshi counted the number of people. The opponent thanked the artisan and his face spread into a smile. The man held up many shards to the petrified family and made his demands if the artisan didn't want him to break them. The man pointed many crystals at the Ikeboshi and ordered him not to move. At the same moment, one of the shards pierced the Ikeboshi's shoulder through and the tinker screamed. Kai called out to his teacher and didn't know how to help him. The stranger thought he might have had enough, but he wasn't done yet and ordered him not to move. As the crystals cut into Ikeboshi's body, Kai begged him to stop it, but the man said he had more. He finally decided to stop it and was quite disappointed. Despite how cool Ikeboshi appeared, he lost to him. The protective orb created by the artisan broke and the Ikeboshi fell to the ground. Shocked by what was happening, the Kai rushed to the teacher, who was bleeding. His entire body was scarred. Kai thought that all this was happening for the reason that he was allowing himself to dream. While he blamed himself for what was happening, the man asked the red diamond guy to get out of the way. The hero asked to stop all this because he came here for the red diamond. Kai headed towards his opponent, but Ikeboshi grabbed his arm. The guy asked to let him go, for it was the only way out. Ikeboshi smiled and said that it wasn't. He thought Kai was a smart guy who should have realized that in this case his decision would mean he had given up. The teacher asked Kai not to let him win. Just like last time, Ikeboshi asked the guy to lend him his power. He gave the hero a diamond in his hand and asked him to pray to the stone. After all, if he did so, it would surely answer his prayers. But the Kai clutched the stone in his hands and did not understand how he could do it. He cried out that if only he had not dreamed of anything and hoped for nothing, then his teacher would not have been so hurt. Ikeboshi reached out his hand to the Kai and stroked his head. He said he saw the light within him when he found him in the village, resolutely refusing to give up. The teacher saw the spark in his eyes when the Kai vowed to heal his family. Ikeboshi asked him not to force those feelings to become nothing. After all, he had told him earlier that the gem was a miracle born between man and nature, and if they had no hopes, gems would be just ordinary pebbles. Kai wondered if he should have prayed and had some hope, or if he should have even dreamed. The boy squeezed the stone and decided he wasn't going to do it for himself, but for the sake of his mentor, who had helped him with everything all this time, for the one who taught him to dream, and for him, he would do anything. Ikeboshi stared in amazement at the blinding light that began to emanate from the stone in the Kai's hands. The man who had been listening to them all this time admitted that it was quite nice to listen to the tearful story of teacher and student. He held out his petrified hand to the heroes and said that they should have turned to stone as soon as possible. The man wanted to capture this beautiful moment faster. Kai focused on the stone and shouted at the diamond. He asked the stone to become stronger, and in the same second there was an answering flashback at the enemy. Ikeboshi was shocked and couldn't believe that the hero would be able to use the release of the flash of light and counterattack. In the meantime, the audit office staff received a report. The repair of the malfunction of the northwest barrier had been completed. It was necessary to focus all energy on destroying the stone beasts that had broken the walls. Now they too were about to join the battle, as Ku suddenly called out to her teacher. She quickly corrected herself and addressed the captain of the 1st Division. She came with a report that there was an artisan in the southwest quarter who was turning people into stone, and it was urgent to request their help. The division captain asked that the rescue division captain and the 2nd and 5th Division captain be brought in. Response was their top priority. Ikeboshi thought that the significance of gems came from their history and characterization. It all depended on the artisan who wielded them, and the abilities extracted from them were multifaceted. So he always assumed that the diamond's abilities related to durability. And this is the radiance of the diamond, the counterattack derived from the reflection of its properties. With a smirk, the opponent admitted that it wasn't bad, but he doubted that the hero would be able to repeat it again. Kai fainted and the tinker caught his apprentice. The man was not surprised by this and ordered the Ikeboshi not to move. The stranger got tired of repeating the same thing and brought the shards closer to the petrified people. But suddenly someone shouted to Mr. Ikeboshi not to be afraid of it, and the artisan turned around. Their faithful Ku came to their rescue and destroyed all the splinters with her whip. Ikeboshi was glad to see her. The girl looked at the unconscious guy and apologized to him for making him wait. but their rescue team was already here. Ikeboshi was surprised to see Sakin here. Sakin was the captain of the 1st Division of the Audit Bureau's Charge Federation. He said that they had come to lend support to the Ikeboshi senpai and were completely at his disposal. Ikeboshi grabbed his sword and said that he was very grateful. After that, he used the ruby blow of blossoming flame and attacked the enemy, but the enemy reminded him that if he attacked him with fire, poison gas would be released. Sakin asked to introduce himself and said that it was his gemstone lapis lazuli. If he is caught in its threads with the gem embedded in them, they will purify all evil. Thus all poisonous vapors were absorbed by her purifying crystal sphere of lapis lazuli. The man from the support squad greeted the Ikeboshi, happy that he was still alive, and offered to heal him while they had time. But the tinker thanked him and asked him to examine this child first. The man wanted to know what about him, but Ikeboshi said he would be fine, for the Kai had bought him some time. During that time he cauterized most of his wounds. After a while, Sakin's absorbing sphere began to crumble and was eventually destroyed. The opponent howled as blood began to ooze from his arm. Ikeboshi was unwilling to give him any extra time and attacked the opponent from the back. But the man had time to react to his sudden strike and block the sword with his thin staff. He admitted that this was pretty good, for the Ikeboshi was always surrounded by friends. The artisan began to speculate that he might have met this man somewhere. The stranger said that Ikeboshi, like Mr. Sparkling Stone, was always the center of attention. He was adored, respected, and expected to be adored. But on the other hand, the man was amused at how many people Ikeboshi had crushed in his path. The last words clearly hurt the Ikeboshi, followed by a bright flash. The opponent released a pile of crystals straight from his staff, which almost grazed the Ikeboshi's face. At the last moment, the artisan managed to turn his head away from them. Ikeboshi slipped sideways from the enemy staff and found himself at the enemy's back. Catching the opportunity, the artisan struck his opponent with his foot. Sakin told his partner named Yuan that it was time for them to enter the arena as well. He asked him to concentrate, and the Yuan understood him. When Yuan's preparations were finished, he used the bond of silver minerals. At the same moment, all the houses in the city began to shake silver objects. Yuan was the captain of the 2nd Division of the Audit Bureau. His ability was to transfer other people's abilities. He said that he had connected the silver jewelry of the civilians who had failed to escape and was willing to transfer their abilities at any moment. Ikeboshi's sword lit up with bright flames as he used his ruby power. His opponent noticed that Ikeboshi's flames were getting stronger and more intense. From the crushing force, windows in nearby houses began to shatter. The 4th Division captain thought he had traveled quite a long way, which seemed like punishment to him. He picked up his metal scissors. After that, the 4th Division captain named Rasha used the Demon's Kiss. His gemstone was black agate, and the ability was to cut through space at a short distance. Along with this, he used the Splitting Void at the same time as transferring the minerals from the 3rd Division Captain Yugen. The people that stayed in their homes were too scared, not realizing what was happening to the silver items in their homes. Sakin asked Rasha where he had sent them, and the captain replied that they had gone to a neighboring street. Sakin inquired of Chidos about the well-being of the Kai. The man replied that he had abused his powers and also hit his head. Sakin thought they were pretty amazing. He never would have thought our tinkers would be so amazing. Coming to his senses, Kai thought he should have helped in some way, but Chidos didn't think so. He smiled and said he would otherwise stop his blood flow and kill him. Kai jumped up from his seat, but the man laughed and said he was just kidding. Chidos was the captain of the rescue division, whose gemstone was heliotrope. His ability was healing. He wanted to reassure the guy about his teacher, and since they had no hostages now, Ikeboshi wouldn't lose to him again. Ikeboshi cut his opponent's stone arm, which began to crack and sprout again, but the artisan cut it off again and again. The enemy realized that his regeneration was not that fast, but he still tried to seize the moment and told Ikeboshi that he was caught. The enemy was quite puzzled when the tinker's body completely dissolved. He noticed that there was a group of people standing nearby. The girl in the group smiled and said she had guided him. It was a Shurai who was the captain of the 5th Division. Her gemstone was an appetite. She was capable of creating illusions and told the enemy that it was not the real Ikeboshi. The real Ikeboshi appeared over the man's head and said that he was already used to envious people like him. Ikeboshi just lived his life and never crushed anyone or looked down on anyone. And if you wanted to hate him, that was his choice. Ikeboshi had only one thing to ask for, and that was to ask for the life back that this man had stolen from this boy. The artisan unleashed a volley of heavenly flames that burned even his comrades. Shurai yelled at the boy that he was a complete fool and asked him to calm down. The destructive fire rained down on the enemy, and Sakin immediately ordered everyone to move the civilians to safety. All the captains of the division started to carry out the order. Ikeboshi stopped when he suddenly saw another enemy behind the man. It was a girl who had already thought her partner could handle the red diamond. But as it turned out, he got his ass kicked. The man frowned and said he wasn't. Ikeboshi tore towards them and ordered them to stop, but he was stopped by the Sakin and said that with their wounds it was hopeless. Besides, they should be glad that their enemies had retreated honorably. But one of the captains thought there was nothing dignified about it. Ikeboshi looked around and saw his apprentice, Captain, and Ku heading towards him. Ku was scared to tears and told Ikeboshi that he needed to have his wounds examined. Ikeboshi smiled slightly and admitted he was right. The artisan hugged Kai and Ku, happy that they were in one piece. As the enemies retreated, the man kept telling the girl that he hadn't lost. She decided it was easier to agree with him. He proved that it was true and that he couldn't lose. The man looked at the diamond shard in his hands and thought that the seed had already been laid as planned. It left behind a certain uneasiness and mystery. After escaping the Antimonite man, the heroes were led to the Federation Medical Tower. According to Ku, the protagonist's lack of guiding power led to an overabundance of ability, which depleted his stamina. Because of this, Kai had a fever for 3 days and 3 nights. When he finally woke up, Ikeboshi with more severe wounds looked at him with worried eyes. After the Kai had fully recovered, they headed to the Mine Federation Eastern headquarters. Kai, along with Ikeboshi, was called to a meeting that the hero was completely unprepared for. At the Mine Federation Eastern Division headquarters Mine Federation, they were met by a chief of staff named Miu. It was an incredibly important looking person. Her handmaiden clarified that the former 12th stone pillar Ruby Ikeboshi and the red diamond youth were standing in front of them. The Ikeboshi and the boy confirmed their identities. The old lady smiled at the guy and said it was nice to meet him. She asked him not to be so nervous, but the Kai didn't realize what was wrong with her voice. Her ladyship Miu could not speak with her voice, so she created vibrations with this crystal, and when they passed through the mechanism, they became a sound they could perceive. Therefore, her handmaiden would want the boys to listen to her carefully. The old lady decided to start with Kai and asked him to show her his red diamond. The Kai looked at the Ikeboshi as if asking permission to do so. Sakin helped the Kai up the steps and the hero showed her ladyship his stone foot. Her subordinate carefully examined the lad's foot and said that there was no mistake here. With this size, it could be worth about 1 billion, and it was clearly a red diamond. It came so close to the Kai's leg that the guy tensed up and tried to push it away. In that case, her ladyship said they would have to take care of him. They had to take the red diamond under protection and then the Ikeboshi would be punished. Kai couldn't believe his ears and didn't understand why his teacher was waiting to be punished. Sakin explained that he had not informed the Federation of anything. The Mine Federation was in charge of everything related to or even the artisans. When a rare stone capable of laying the seed of war was found, the artisan was obligated to report it to the Federation. In other words, he was suspected of trying to keep the diamond for himself. Kai didn't understand what they were talking about, and the old woman asked if he had any suspicions about the Ikeboshi. She clarified if he thought that the artisan might have been nice to him just because of his red diamond. But Ikeboshi was surprised when Kai said that was not the case. He did not believe in such a thing. Her ladyship said that the crystal didn't change and it was like the guy was telling the truth. In that case, she would like to hear Ikeboshi's explanation. The artisan didn't deny that his report was delayed and it wasn't a mistake. The red diamond was very important and required a lot of attention, so he was worried about something. Her ladyship's counsel did not understand what he meant. It concerned the boy's freedom and honor. If the artisan reported it, then someone from the Federation would come and start insisting on protecting the stone despite the circumstances, making it harder to leave the city. So he came here to personally ask a favor of Lady Miu. Hearing this, Lady Miu's counselor became furious and did not understand how he dared to say such a thing. Kai became confused and looked then at the counselor and then at the Ikeboshi. The artisan knelt down and bowed before her ladyship, pleading with her. He fell to the very ground and begged for permission to continue their journey as a couple. Kai was shocked, not understanding why he was going to such extremes. The old lady's counselor called him a complete fool, because this diamond was worth 1 billion and he couldn't just take it away. But Lady Miu asked him to wait. She wanted to know the guy's opinion on the matter, who was very excited. Overcome with fear, he knelt down and said he would like to go with Ikeboshi. He would like to ask her for something and her ladyship extended her hand to the Kai. She asked the lad to stop it, for the children were not to bow to them or they would dishonor themselves. The old woman wanted to honor Ikeboshi's feelings as a teacher, but as an organization, she wanted an assurance that this journey would be of benefit to them. Ikeboshi asked not to worry about guarantees. As far as usefulness was concerned, he would catch the one responsible for the recent attack, the Antimonite male. But the counselor had said that they were also trying to find out his whereabouts, and that wasn't enough to start this journey. With those words, he shook the lad's clothes off the dust as if they were a really valuable diamond. Ikeboshi was sure that this man, a former member of the Federation. Everyone, including the Sokin, was stunned by his statement. The artisan could provide proof even though it was the first time he had met him. He called it pigeon blood, which further puzzled her ladyship. But Kai did not understand their reaction and did not realize what this particular nickname was. The counselor wanted to address Lady Miu Miu, but she interrupted him. She said that he was a dark serpent who knew the name of pigeon blood. So he was also an Antimonite artisan who had escaped from the Federation, and it was none other than a man named Kurotobai. The former Federation member has been going around turning people to stone, and if word of this gets out, their credibility will crumble. But there was something else Ikeboshi didn't realize. For some reason, the Kurotobai was trying to take the red diamond. It made sense to the old woman, and if they went on this journey, it would be easier to lure him out of hiding. She pondered over this suggestion. Her ladyship agreed and said that his assurances would be considered. Her counselor jumped up on the spot at Lady Miu Miu's sudden decision, and the old woman allowed Ikeboshi and Kai to go. But lastly, she had something to say. She didn't expect this from someone who was unwilling to take on an apprentice, and she certainly didn't expect to see him bow. As the saying went, with age comes wisdom, and the embarrassed artisan thanked Lady Miu Miu. The counselor apologized to Lady Miu Miu and asked her how he should have explained it to the staff. Thereupon the protagonists left her ladyship's hall. They collapsed to the ground tiredly, and Kai admitted that it was rather tiring. He was beginning to realize why Ikeboshi disliked this place so much. As his teacher had told him, it was quite stuffy here. The tinker also wanted to apologize to him for treating him like bait, but the Kai thought it was fine. The Kurotobai needed him anyway. Kai thought they would continue their journey as they tried to lure him out and kill two birds with one stone. He kept thinking about something the whole time. He didn't understand why the tinker had chosen him to be his apprentice. After all, he had never taken them on before. For whatever reason, everyone was talking about it. But it wasn't just that. For some reason, Ikeboshi did a lot of things for him, for he knew almost nothing about him. And that was all he thought about. To the artisan, everything became clear. He rose to his feet and warned that it might sound a little pathetic, but he would tell him nonetheless. 4 years ago, he had worked in the audit office of the Charcoal Federation. Frankly, he didn't feel comfortable there. Kai didn't understand what the reason was, because Ku said that everyone was equal to him. The artisan didn't deny it, but he was hated twice as much for it. And the nickname he heard called Pigeon Blood was the name for a first-rate ruby. A very clear ruby with a deep red color. And since he was chosen as the most suitable person for this ruby, some people started calling him that. He hated the name, and felt that working in the bureau was stifling him, so he left the Federation. Then he began traveling with the old man Bao in search of the gems he loved so much. He spent his time as he wished, but still for whatever reason he felt a loneliness growing in his chest. But then he met Akaya. When he asked him to make him his disciple, Ikeboshi realized that he could not continue to live like this. And after that, he suddenly felt quite happy. At that moment, Kai was moved by his story and was sure that he was telling the truth. But he did not believe that Pigeon Blood was a common nickname. There were 12 other pillars of stone about which he told him nothing. Suddenly the hero shouted that he would train, which frightened the tinker. He assumed that he was not reliable enough, and so he wanted to become stronger. But it was not only to get his family back, but also to protect himself and defend his freedom. There were also a bunch of other reasons to do it. The hero believed that he owed his teacher and had to become stronger in order to repay his debt. Meanwhile, the counselor decided to question Lady Miu Miu. He did not believe that she really intended to miss the red diamond. But the old woman replied that it was only until the Kurotobai were captured. If they were going to curb the red diamond now, it would be easier to deal with it in the future. Either way, she had no intention of missing it and asked for a kite to be sent to watch them. She gave a couple of small crystallized objects to the advisor and asked that this be attached to keep them company. The counselor examined the eavesdropping crystals and said they were agate. The old woman would never have thought that this Kurotobai would turn people to stone. She asked to listen carefully and told the counselor that if the Ikeboshi and the boy with the red diamond learned of this incident, she would allow everything to be let loose to make it look like it never happened. Thus new hopes and dangerous conspiracies awaited them on their journey, whose path was yet to be determined. Now that the Kai was allowed to travel with the tinker, Ikeboshi picked out a new outfit for him. He was thrilled and said that the Kai looked pretty cool, but the hero clearly didn't want to walk around in it. Ikeboshi was shocked, as he had ordered this outfit especially for him. No matter how you looked at it, they looked identical. The artisan replied that this cloak was a sign of apprenticeship and he was obligated to wear it. At this time, a Sakin approached them and apologized for the wait. He gave notice that he had brought them a personal bodyguard. Ikeboshi was quite surprised when he saw the smug Ku in front of them. Kai didn't understand why she was their bodyguard, but the girl had told him that she wouldn't leave Ikeboshi to him alone. The artisan checked with the Sakin to see if she was indeed their bodyguard. To be honest, the Sakin himself had no way of knowing that. One could only assume what the superiors were going to do. Sakin asked the girl about a certain item and the Ku started looking for it in her pockets. She pulled out and showed the guys a black onyx pearl, which was the basis for a safety net. It contained the power to move through space. If Ku filled it with her guiding power, she could bring Kai back here in the blink of an eye. If it only acted on him, the Kai assumed it was all to protect the red diamond. Ikeboshi put his hand on the boy's shoulder and understood everything. The artisan bowed to the Sakin and vowed to protect his precious apprentice at the cost of his life. Kai looked at the Ku and remembered that she was forced to leave her life here for him, after all. He bowed to Sakin and Ku and said he was sorry. Sakin said that he didn't need to bow his head in apology, because it was all Kurotobai's fault. Turning people into stone was a terrible act that would not be forgiven. They had formed a separate team and would do everything in their power to catch him. And they would like the guy to go outside and see the world and learn a lot. Kai thanked them profusely for the opportunity. Sakin smiled at Kai, after which he turned to the Ku. He bowed and addressed her not as her superior but as her mentor. He hugged her and asked her to let him know if anything happened to them. He also asked her to take care of herself and tears welled up in Ku's eyes. She promised the teacher and told teacher Sakin that she will definitely come back again. After that, Ikeboshi told the boys that they were going to make a weapon. That was their next destination. Considering that Kurotobai could make another attack, their priority was to give the Kai a chance to defend themselves. Ku looked at the guy with a sneer and said that Ikeboshi was right. The artisan replied to the Kai that he was already capable of setting up a link with the diamond. So Nai had to make the perfect weapon to enhance that ability. Kai's eyes lit up when he heard about them making the perfect weapon just for him. Ikeboshi was unsurprised by the boy's usual uncontrollable joy. Ku also frowned. But before that, he had to practice. Right now, Kai had 3 powers that he could use, but he had too little channeling power, which affected his stamina. He lacked the ability to use his powers properly. The first diamond skill was reflection. The second red diamond skill was turning stones into diamonds. Using it was forbidden. The third was ore, a skill mainly for using magnetic boots. The teacher said that the way to refine his powers was simple. One needed to put these skills into practice, and Ku gladly agreed to help Kai. Ku plopped the guy on the ground and the hero said that Ikeboshi's teaching method was very primitive, although it was easy to understand. The hero realized that he had to use reflection power for upper body strikes and he couldn't even activate it. For attacks to the legs, he used magnetic boots. As he barely thought of dodging, his boots jumped upwards along with the Kai, and the guy fell to the floor. His blow was too strong and Ikeboshi wanted to make sure he was okay. Earlier, Ku thought he would be a genius since he could manipulate diamonds, but he turned out to be just a beginner. Still, such people usually gave up very quickly. Ikeboshi was worried that the hero had hit his head, but Kai said he was fine. Ku noticed that they really were very close. Kai apologized to Ku and asked her to duel again. Ku smiled and happily agreed. While they were fighting in Ikeboshi's house, the turtle thought about how tired she was and had a hard time walking. All the time they spent in the moving house, Kai studied with Ikeboshi, fought with the Ku, and also read books. Along the way, they stopped at pointed rocks where the Ku and Ikeboshi taught the hero how to keep his balance. But the Kai was very bad at it. Then along the way they came across a huge skeleton of a creature they were passing through and Kai needed to climb it. With difficulty, but he managed to climb up onto the bones where the Ku and Ikeboshi were waiting for him. From there they had a rather beautiful view of the sea. Altogether they not only practiced but also cooked the delicious food that the Ku liked so much. Ku, together with Kai, fed the turtle on which their house was located and then practiced. The boy had been practicing jumping rope, and he had already managed to grow crystals. Ku noticed that he was working harder than she thought he would, but the hero didn't understand what she was talking about. Their federation was also trying to catch the Kuritobai, and he could just wait it out without even breaking a sweat. But Kai disagreed and said that it was his problem from the beginning and he wouldn't let the Federation do it all on their own. Plus, he saw his peer in front of him who was already fighting alongside the adults. It surprised Ku that Kai could feel jealous of that. At that moment, she hesitated and accidentally punched the hero in the stomach. Kai flew back and said that she hit him with all her might, for which she apologized. Ku would never have thought he would say such a thing. She thought it should have been her in his place. She gritted her teeth and admitted that she was actually jealous of him, but just a little. Kai didn't understand the expression on her face and why she could be jealous of him. The value of an artisan was determined by what stone he was compatible with. This was a belief held by everyone. Tiger's Eye was regarded as a semi-precious stone because it was not very rare, nor was it very durable. Compared to such stones as diamond or ruby, it was considered inferior. Her words surprised the Kai and the girl frowned. She remembered the time when she was younger and couldn't bear it. Ku cried and thought that her father would be angry with her if she didn't have a brighter stone. The girl threw the stone and said that it was definitely not hers. But at that moment her stone was caught by someone's hand. It was Ikeboshi who scrutinized the Tiger's Eye. He assumed it was her stone, but the girl squatted down and said it wasn't. It made sense to Ikeboshi and he smiled. The artisan told her that the gem symbolized knowledge and wealth. The Tiger's Eye led her to success because of her ability to see the true nature of things and make correct judgments. He handed the stone back to the Ku and said that it was a very wise and noble stone. The sparkling gemstones also had their own charm, and this little stone was waiting in the darkness underground until Ku found it. That was why she had to treasure it. Now of course Ku thought otherwise, and this lady, her huge tiger, was her most important jewel. But earlier Kai thought her tiger had turned to stone. Ku explained that her true nature was the stone. As long as the stone was intact, she could appear at any time. But Ku would never have thought that someone like Kai, who could attune to a diamond, would put so much effort into it. Ku's mother was a polisher and they always told her something. She said that gemstones had no hierarchy and were the same as colors. People who wore red loved the color red, and it didn't make them better or worse than anyone else. They weren't all different. Ku stopped in her story and stared in surprise at the guy who covered his ears. Ku cried out and couldn't believe that she was jealous of him even knowing his circumstances. She felt very sorry for him. She bowed several times and asked Kai to apologize. Kai laughed and admitted that she was indeed a sincere person. He said that she had nothing to worry about. As a sign of her apology, she was willing to give him a seat next to Master Ikeboshi. But Kai repeated that everything was fine. Meanwhile, the Ikeboshi was watching the guys from the balcony of their house and smiling. Ku and Ikeboshi excitedly told the guy that since he was done with his training, they would go to their next destination. Kai grabbed the railing of the house and asked them to calm down at least for a second. Their turtle house reached a huge crevice and Bao said he was counting on Ikeboshi. Kai was shocked that he jumped down without any hesitation. Ku and Kai grabbed onto the teacher and a joyful Ikeboshi used aquamarine. After that, their entire house along with the turtle were covered in indigo water cell. Kai was even more worried when they fell into the ocean, river or pond. They were underwater where he couldn't breathe, but a disgruntled Ku told him he was breathing right now. Kai came to his senses and thought she was right. He noticed strange clouds that were surprisingly underwater. Ikeboshi explained to the guy that they were popping bubbles from an underwater city. Kai didn't realize what he was talking about until he saw everything with his own eyes. They arrived at the very real underwater city. This city was founded at the foot of a volcano where the original stones were made. Here were mines called Inobai. The city in the blue of the sea was an incredible beauty beyond any description. Most minerals were formed near volcanoes and magma. So here in the Inobai mines, they used that and modified the formation process to produce rare stones that you wouldn't normally find on the market. Kai was excited and immediately suggested that they go get some weapons, but Ku ordered the hero to stop. She reminded the guy that she was his bodyguard and asked him not to think that he could run away from her so easily. Kai reluctantly agreed and thought about how dangerous it was to run around here anyway. Her ladyship Miu Miu told Ku that she had to watch Kai carefully. Ku of course knew Master Ikeboshi, but she didn't know Kai at all. Ikeboshi recalled that he actually knew a weapons artisan here and suggested going to see him first. Kai was worried about money, but Ikeboshi asked him not to worry about that. He looked at how much he had and counted about 10,000 yuan. Kai was shocked at his teacher. He was a grown man and he only had 10,000. Plus, he was an important person. Ku speculated that Mr. Ikeboshi might have forgotten the money at the old man's boa, but Ikeboshi swore by the fact that he had it. At some point some papers sprinkled from the teacher's pockets and Kai decided to take a look at them. Ikeboshi got scared and shouted that they were his. Kai grimly read this check, which contained alexandrite, blue zoisite, tourmaline, periba and 3 other stones with a price of 5 million yuan. The boy grabbed his teacher by his clothes and began to shake him. He didn't understand how he couldn't handle not only the housework, but also couldn't keep track of his money. Ikeboshi tried to calm the Kai down and explain everything to him. He said it was quite simple. Ikeboshi understood and promised to sell some stones, but Kai refused and asked to use the money to pay off his debt. Kai decided that it didn't matter and was going to go earn the money himself, but Ikeboshi tried to stop him. He put his hand on the guy's shoulder and said he wouldn't let him do that, because he was his student. After all, it was the teacher's duty and Ikeboshi had to be responsible for his own discipline. Kai was surprised by this answer and Ku felt proud. She always knew that Mr. Ikeboshi was wonderful. The protagonists ended up at a gambling house where a beautiful waitress was bringing drinks to the customers. The men were playing even odd, and Ikeboshi exclaimed that he had even. Kai looked grimly at his teacher and admitted that he was a complete idiot. But Ikeboshi asked the hero to just wait and said he was on a roll. Kai decided to repeat himself and called his teacher a fool. Ku, meanwhile, was thinking about something. Kai didn't think they would get into the gambling house, but it seemed to Ku that Ikeboshi was in pain right now. I mean, he was in pain physically. Ku thought that made sense and asked Kai about it. Normally, it would be easier for Ikeboshi to collect gems from stone beasts, and maybe this method wasn't the most correct, but the Kai had something to keep in mind. Kai had to realize that now Mr. Ikeboshi was fighting for his sake. Ku ended up having to calm down Mr. Ikeboshi, who was completely desperate. Kai realized that he had lost everything, but he didn't see it as a big deal since he had no hope for anything anyway. Ku became furious and asked Kai to be more tactful, and the hero went somewhere else. She asked the hero where he was going, but Kai remained silent. He went up to the people who were playing and apologized to them. He made a rather sweet innocent face and admitted that he had never gambled, so he would like to try it with them. Ku didn't realize what he was doing at all. She tried to stop him, but it was too late. One man assumed that he was that artisan's apprentice and had come here to avenge his teacher. They thought that was pretty good, and the man's muscular arm embraced the hero. The man with the katana told the Kai that this gray-haired guy got his ass kicked and the Kai must have had a hard time with a teacher like that. The hero admitted with the same smile that he was indeed having a hard time. While Ikeboshi sat resentfully on the sidelines, he could hear the man talking, comparing him to a weakling and ready to take him down with one punch. The man offered a deal and said that if Kai lost, he would leave this loser and start working for him. Besides, as a craftsman, he should have realized where all the rich men were. The drunken man promised to share his profits with him, and Kai agreed. He put his hand over the mouth of the Ku who wanted to say something to him. Kai smiled and said he would agree to such terms, but only if the man overpowered him. The man laughed and patted the guy on the back. He admitted that Kai was a pretty brave guy and they agreed. Kai pretended to be a harmless boy and asked to go easy on him. The surprised Ku wasn't sure if the hero would win in this deal, but the guy still kept her mouth shut. He leaned over to the girl, smirked and asked her to just wait. The girl picked up the dice and shook them under the straw cup. Some shouted even and some shouted odd. It ended up being 3 and 1 even. The man grinned at the newcomer. As a result, at the moment of their game, many gawkers gathered to watch their interesting game. It was quite impressive for everyone, as Kai was somehow winning all the time. The man was losing his temper and didn't understand how this little guy could beat him. Eventually, the man couldn't take it anymore and pointed his blade at the guy, thinking he was trying to screw him over. He didn't understand how the hero could beat him 50 times in a row. Kai shamed him for calling him a cheater now, since it was he and the dealer who were the real cheaters to begin with. First, they decided which games would be even and which would be odd. And they also prepared a set of dice with numbers from 1 to 6 filled with water in different halves of each die. And then the woman would simply roll the dice according to the arrangement. Ko began to understand how the cubes produced the numbers they needed. In this case, the Ku didn't understand how he won, and the guy said he memorized the dice by the pattern on the tree. This trick was quite simple, but the girl did not understand how he knew all this. Kai made a casual face and admitted that he had a part-time job like that. The man swung his sword and told the guy he would pay for it, but the hero jumped up and dodged the blow. Kai applied his diamond and asked the Ku to stay out of it. The guy wanted to try out his technique. He kicked the man's face with his foot and called the kick a million diamond kick. Another bald man, who was apparently the brother of the cheater, intervened in their fight. Kai turned toward him and kicked him, but before he knew it, the man's heavy hand grabbed his hood from behind. The man that grabbed him rejoiced and thought the hero had been caught, but the Kai slipped out from under the robe, somersaulted backwards and kicked the man. Ku was surprised that the Kai had indeed become more nimble and couldn't believe her eyes. She found it hard to believe that he had learned to use the magnetic boots and diamonds so quickly. The man gritted his teeth in anger and cursed the boy before throwing an axe at him, but Kai instantly extended his arm and defended himself with a diamond shield. The axe ricocheted off and plunged right between the legs of the terrified man. It was quite close and the Kai stepped up to the man, stepping on the axe's handle. Kai looked arrogantly at the man and said that he was nowhere near his teacher. Kai was then able to grow sharp crystals from the axe blade, which wounded the man and he fell to the floor. The hero used the red diamond, but somehow the victory was his. Ku was happy about it and the hero clenched his hand into a fist just as happily. Ikeboshi took a deep breath and rushed to hug the Kai in tears, not believing it had come to this. He promised that he would sell some of his stones, but the Kai asked him to stop. After all, he had already dealt with everything. Ku smiled and thought everything was settled. Now Kai didn't seem like some bad guy to her. Kai smiled and told the master that he was like a child. Someone behind them clapped their hands and said it was impressive. The hooded stranger thought it was beautiful and now it made sense to him. The protagonist stared at the stranger, unaware of who it might be. In a place where darkness reigned, the protagonist spent a whole year. People wondered why his diamond was shrinking and suggested that they weren't feeding him. The man replied that they were trying to get him to eat. But the guy kept throwing it all away and must have mental problems. After the man said that the guy needed freedom as well as a meaning in life, they decided to let him go. Then the lord of the village told Kai that once he saved up to ransom his family, he could sell them to him. Then Kai finally came to a less gloomy place and remembered the words his mother had told him. The mother was telling her son that the stones were born in places even deeper than this. They kept moving a little at a time until they found their way to the people. And humans were the same way. At first they are just pebbles with no resemblance to gems, but one day they will find a place where they can shine. So the mother was telling Kai that if he thought one day that he couldn't shine, he had to take a chance and find another place where he could be himself. He could have told his mother that it was just an escape, but that was completely untrue. Every living thing was looking for a place it could call home. So if he didn't get lucky at first, he didn't have to think about giving up. Every time the hero returned home after work, he would cry over the small amount of money he had earned and say that it wasn't enough. Also, his mother said that if he was lucky enough to find the perfect place, he had to remember to share that glow. People just needed the magic word to start shining. And one day Kai heard the children admiring a craftsman with a red stone in his earring. And those magic words were words of gratitude. The mother suggested that Kai give thanks at every opportunity and shine as brightly as he could. Kai was to help the person who helped him find his place. His mother was sure that if he did this, he could become an irreplaceable diamond. And so the teacher was able to find his way to the student who was called the Stone. The unfamiliar man by his robe startled the Kai and exclaimed that he was glad to see them. He threw his arms around the guy, and Ikeboshi recognized him as Benito, who was still just as strong. Ku assumed it was an acquaintance of his. Ikeboshi revealed that they had been friends for years. Benito was a weapons master. He also had his apprentice with him, who thought the Kai was already dead from his strong embrace. Ikeboshi told Ku that somehow he used to be a doctor and now he could create weapons for every artisan. Ku was surprised that such a person could be a doctor. Of course, Benito was okay with making them weapons, but reminded his friend that he didn't lend money. He asked the artisan about the money and Ikeboshi asked him not to say that. With a smile on his face, he said that of course they had money, more specifically the Kai. In that case, Benito motioned for them to start and looked at the surprised Kai. The hero was a bit shocked that horns were growing out of Benito's head, and Benito realized that he had never met the Stone Eaters. He was a race that lived and fed on stones. The stone horns were their physical feature. Their ability was that they could merge consciousness with ore. And what the hero probably didn't know yet was that they could telepathically communicate with weapons in their gun store. Kai and Ku were thrilled as soon as they entered the Benito store. You could find absolutely any kind of weapon here. Kai exclaimed that this place was pretty cool, and Ku asked to see all these colored blades that were insanely beautiful. Benito said that he was quite talented at synthesizing minerals. Using the exceptional quality of this volcano, he could combine half-formed minerals and stones, mixed nickel and Damascus or mixed obsidian and silver. Kai was thrilled and thought he could choose any weapon he wanted, but Benito said he couldn't do that. He was the one the weapon would choose, and Kai stared at Benito in surprise. Benito saw himself as the one who had to perfectly prepare the Kai for the weapon to choose him. That was exactly how things were arranged here. First, they had to have a small conversation between his stone and the guns. Benito asked the Kai to close his eyes. Kai had to tell what he imagined when he thought of his power. It could have been a person or a thing. It could have been anything he could imagine. Kai closed his eyes and thought about it. At that moment, Benito began to take over his thoughts, and everyone present only waited silently for his answer. Ku was surprised when everything around her began to sprout crystals. All these stones were glowing, and she realized what conversation Benito was talking about. The Kaya diamond and the red diamond were currently communicating with the guns in this store. Ikeboshi thought it was beautiful and wanted to listen too. Suddenly, the hero saw the silhouette of a man with a flaming sword in front of him and thought it wasn't him at all. Kai saw Ikeboshi in front of him and Benito gave him a thumbs up. Kai was embarrassed that Benito saw this and gave the guy 100 points. Eventually there was silence in the store and Benito told Kai that none of the weapons had responded. The guy was shocked that this could even happen. In other words, there were no weapons with which he could be compatible, and Benito admitted that this was the first time this had ever happened to him. At that moment a strange little creature appeared in front of them. Benito greeted the Gonachana, but Kai did not hear it. Benito explained that it was an ore seal, and they could tune into the ore even better than the eaters. The seal spit out a small blade under Kai's feet, causing the guy to startle and fall to the floor. Kai shouted that the seal had spit out a dagger. Benito noticed that the seal was eating the weapon again, even though he told him not to. Once near the hero, the dagger shone with a bright flash. It steamed over the ground and Benito found it quite interesting. It looked like this little guy had chosen him, but Kai didn't understand how that was possible. Kai thought it was disgusting that such a vomiting lump could pick him. Benito's apprentice meanwhile thought that Kai was stupid, and it wasn't vomit at all. The disciple grudgingly told the guy that it was his first-class weapon and Gong-chan just swallowed it. He also asked the Kai not to make a face like he was just a simple student and nothing more. Ikeboshi offered the hero to just hold it in his hands and Kai decided to take the blade just once. He pulled the dagger from its sheath and the weapon shimmered with light again. Kai thought it was strange, but it was handy nonetheless. Ku wanted to know the concept of this weapon. The guy said that this dagger was made of a shape memory alloy, and even if it was bent it would become the same. The disgruntled hero didn't understand why it could bend at all. Kai was indeed able to bend the dagger with ease and was upset that he had gotten such trash. Benito leaned over the Kai and asked him to listen. Benito said with a smile that just as there were no stones desired by all people, there were no things that could truly be considered trash. In other words, it all depended on who owned it. The hero remembered that the Kurogane, despite what he looked like, did not like fighting, so he made weapons for defense or escape. As a shopkeeper, he felt sorry that he had nothing but his students' weapons. But as his teacher, it would please him if he tried this weapon. After all, it was the weapon that had chosen him. Kai clutched the dagger and decided to try it, then asked Kurogane to help him. Benito turned to Ikeboshi and told him that Kai was a very nice guy, but the artisan knew it. While Kai, along with Ku and Kurogane, tested the dagger, the teachers chatted among themselves. Benito already realized that Ikeboshi had come here for far more than that, and the artisan smiled. He had no doubt that he could hide nothing from Benito. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by the cries of the Kai, who had figured out how to use that dagger. He screamed so loudly that everyone present jumped with fear. The boys made their way to Benito's training ground where a stone golem called Go-chan was waiting for them. Benito's apprentice wanted to make sure Kai was okay, but the hero smiled and asked to just let him try to do it. Ikeboshi reminded the Kai that the stone was following the will of the artisan, and asked to imagine it thinner, cleaner and sharper than anything else in this world. Finally, Ikeboshi told the student that he had no doubt of his success, but asked him not to overdo it. Kai understood and prepared for battle, drawing his dagger in front of him. He tried to visualize the shape of the blade and remembered how he had strengthened Ikeboshi's sword with his diamond. He did the same with the dagger. After reinforcing the dagger, Kai jumped up and swung at the golem. He easily cut the stone golem like butter with the red flash skill. The golem fell to the ground with a clatter and the satisfied Kai asked to take a look at it. The golem became sand and thanks to the memorizing metal, he could turn the dagger into a diamond as many times as he wanted. Benito's apprentice was surprised that the hero was able to use this dagger correctly. Ku and Ikeboshi were jumping with happiness that the hero had succeeded. The teacher swooped down on the Kai and hugged him. Kai asked for it to stop, but Ikeboshi yelled that he was cool. Ku thought it was unfair and said she wanted to hug the Ikeboshi master too. Benito decided not to give in to them and also wanted to do it. Late at night when everyone was asleep, Benito closed the door behind him and said it was okay. Ikeboshi took off the top of his clothes and told Benito that children grow up pretty fast. Benito became serious and said that this was not the time for idle chatter. He wanted to know what had become of this part of Ikeboshi. He looked grimly at the torso of the tinker, the right and left parts of which were in crystals and patterns. Benito demanded an explanation from the Ikeboshi. That night, Kai was disturbed by one of his nightmares. He saw that moment when Ikeboshi was pierced by a sharp crystal and jumped up from his seat. Kai didn't want to watch that dream again once more and sighed tiredly. His throat was very dry, so the hero got out of bed and headed for a mug of water. Kai found it surprising that at this hour, the light in Benito and Ikeboshi's room was still on and they were awake. In that case, Kai decided to ask them where the kitchen was. But suddenly he heard the teachers talking, which was slightly tense. Kai didn't understand what they had going on. Benito couldn't believe that Ikboshi could leave everything so easily. Apparently they were arguing and Kai discreetly peeked at them through the door lock. At that moment he noticed the teacher's torso, which was in incomprehensible crystallized patterns. Benito didn't understand why Ikboshi didn't report this to the medical division in the Federation. But Ikboshi said that he had no obvious symptoms at that moment. Plus, if they had known about it, they would have deemed him useless. Ikboshi thought that the Federation would definitely want the pigeon blood back. From shock, Kai covered his mouth with his hands, thinking about the fact that this was the same pigeon blood he was talking about. Benito said that it all started with the three of them, Benito, Karutobi, and Ikboshi. It all started with an experiment. They gathered all the children without parents or relatives and inserted stones into their flesh to artificially create a perfect human being. Kai couldn't believe it and sat in utter horror, still covering his mouth with his hand. He remembered that his teacher always had a smile on his face. Kai didn't understand how he could smile after what had happened to him. Plus, with his thing in his body, based on what Kurotobi had told him, Ikboshi suspected he was from the failed experiments. Benito thought those people had gone through a greater hell than they had. But now, ironically, thanks to the pigeon blood, even after Kurotobi had implanted the antimonite in him, the alchemic process had been suppressed. Ikboshi wanted to know the opinions of Benito, who probably thought that the petrification could be stopped. Benito replied that this was true. His cinnabar was the stone of immortality, but Cinnabar's ability was to analyze disease. This would be Benito's first time treating petrification, so it was necessary to analyze everything first. What made it worse was that Benito would have to climb into Ikboshi's body, and even his treatment would be hell for Benito. Benito immediately warned that if anything went wrong, Ikboshi could die. Ikboshi smiled and said that this could be a clue on how to cure Kai's leg. As for Ikboshi, he had no family, but this boy had someone to go back to. That's why he thought that Kai was more important than him. And if Benito could heal his leg, Ikboshi didn't care about him. And even if he died, he would have no regrets. At that moment, the door of their room was kicked open by Kai, who was furious. He lunged at the shocked Ikboshi and grabbed him by his clothes. He didn't understand what his teacher was carrying and thought he was joking. The chair that Ikboshi was sitting on fell to the ground and the Kai pinned his teacher against the wall and hit it with his fist. Kai asked him to visualize the way he felt when dreaming with him, but Ikboshi didn't know what he meant. Kai wondered why the teacher didn't tell him about what happened to his body. Ikboshi apologized, but he didn't want to bother him. Kai didn't understand what that was supposed to mean. He assumed that Ikboshi didn't say anything to him because he was a child, or because of his stone sickness. Kai wasn't sure if Ikboshi was constantly well out of being protective of him all the time. Ikboshi exclaimed that this was not true, and that this was not his intention. In that case, Kai did not understand what his intention was. The hero realized that he was weak, and yet someday he would like to become the equal of his teacher. When Ikboshi told him that Kai had been hard and scary, Kai was incredibly happy. He felt as if a stone had fallen from his shoulders. Kai never once said anything to Ikboshi about himself. Ikboshi didn't understand how he could tell his student about it. After all, he was supposed to remain his teacher. Kai shouted at Ikboshi, not understanding why it was impossible to tell everything. Teachers, after all, were also human beings, and he should have told Kai about how hurt he was. But Ikboshi didn't want to do that and thought that this way he would make Kai worry about him. The boy screamed even louder and asked to stop using it as an excuse. He tried to ask the teacher about how he was feeling. Ikboshi didn't think it could make any difference if he told the Kai about it. But Kai was of a different opinion and knew that things would have changed. The hero only knew that he wouldn't want to get involved with a teacher who had a death wish. Ikboshi couldn't find the words to answer. Kai thought that Ikboshi could die for what was important to him, but not to blame Kai for it. Ikboshi yelled at his student and said that it wasn't like that and he didn't mean it at all. In that case, Kai would want to understand what the artisan meant. But that's what Ikboshi was trying to say anyway. He couldn't stand it and shouted that of course he didn't want to die. Ikboshi realized he had said something unnecessary and covered his mouth. Takebai stared at his friend with a dose of sympathy and Kai smiled. The guy replied that that was all he wanted to hear and that was enough for him. The hero then bowed to the teacher and apologized for all the noise. Ikboshi wanted to say something to the student, but the Kai beat him to it. He told the teacher that if he was willing to talk about what happened to his body, he could discuss it with the coup tomorrow. But if he didn't want to do that, it would still be okay. Kai apologized and changed the subject by asking where the kitchen was around here. Benito explained to him that as soon as he exited the store, there would be a door on the right. Walking out of the room, Kai apologized to the Ikeboshi for acting like a child. The artisan clenched his fist as the Kai left and slammed the door behind him. The Ikeboshi tilted his head upward in pity and placed his hand on it. Benito told the artisan that Kai was really a nice guy, but it made the Ikeboshi feel sorry for him. As Kai left the room and walked forward down the hallway, tears welled up in his eyes. The guy wiped the tears away thinking about Ikeboshi's words. Ikeboshi thought he was his teacher, so he had to be the one to give back. But now the artisan felt that he was the one who got something from the Kai. It was as if they were partners. At one point the Kai stopped and stared in surprise at the human figure, which showed its tongue and pointed a finger at the Kai. Ikeboshi thought they were more like partners rather than teacher and student. At the same time, the Kai fell to his knees in front of the figure he was unfamiliar with. Ikeboshi continued to talk about what he was thinking. He was sure that the more the Kai grew, the more he would be able to rely on him. Ikeboshi was sure of this. The teacher smiled and thought he was supposed to apologize to the Kai tomorrow, but suddenly they heard some noise outside. Kai felt his whole body start to be covered in crystals while Benito and Ikeboshi heard some noise. While the student and teacher were talking, no one even noticed that the Ku also heard them. As the hero headed down the hallway, Ku opened the door and thought she should pretend she didn't hear anything or say something. As the hero headed towards the restroom, he was still trying not to cry and wiped his tears. At that moment, a certain girl called out to him and told him that he was crying like a little child. She looked coldly at the hero and called him a poor child. Kai froze in place when he saw a certain short girl in front of him. For some reason, the hero couldn't say anything and grabbed his throat fearfully. The stranger smiled and pointed at the guy with a finger that was burning with fire. At that moment, Kai felt his lower body go numb and lowered his eyes. He was shocked and dropped his lamp when he saw his body from his foot start to turn into a crystal. In her other hand, the girl took the lamp and told the guy that of all the seeds planted by the Kurutobi, he was the main target. She picked up his thing and called the Kai a good boy for swallowing it so bravely. Kai remembered the moment when the Kurutobi grabbed his face and put his hand over his mouth. Kai guessed that it was Kurotobi's buddy and realized that now he couldn't move because of the crystals. Kurotobi's accomplice was surprised when Kai was able to reach out his hand and break the lantern that was in his enemy's hand. Kai mentally asked for someone to help him. Just then the door was opened by Ku and asked Kai what all the noise was about. Her face immediately changed when she saw the enemy. The girl took out her whip and lunged at the girl, but the girl only ordered the Ku to get out of the way. With these words, she released a multitude of toothy little winged mice. The bats stopped the Ku, who tried to fight them off and swore. Kurotobi's partner smiled and told the red diamond guy that it was time for them to leave. But no sooner had she gotten close to the Kai than she was caught by the Benito apprentice and rushed at her enemy. He swung a mop at the intruder and asked what she was doing in his store. The girl easily jumped up and dodged his mop. The Kurigane lost sight of her for a moment, but the Ku tried to warn the guy that she was on top. Benito's apprentice didn't even have time to look up before the enemy grabbed his head and slammed him to the ground. Kurigane's nose bled and he looked fearfully at his opponent. Ku begged her to stop, for he was still a child, but the clawed hand of the enemy had already swung for a blow. Ikeboshi had time to grab the Kurigane and save it from the stranger's blow. He struck her sharp long claws with his sword and those scattered. The girl thought her time had come. Of course she couldn't get the prize, but that wasn't that important to her now. Benito didn't understand how she was able to get through his barrier, and asked her to stop, but the girl immediately ran away. The rattle of a sword was heard, which Ikeboshi dropped to the ground. When everyone looked at the Kai, they were shocked and couldn't believe their eyes. Right in front of them stood a boy that was petrified just like the other people. The shocked teacher turned to the Ku and the Ku immediately responded. Ikeboshi lost his temper and everything around him erupted in his bright flames. He asked the Ku to send an emergency message to the Federation. At this time, the intruder tried to slip away on the dragon. She didn't count on being allowed to leave quietly. Just as she thought about it, a bright pillar of flame tried to shoot down her dragon, but the girl whistled. She summoned a huge shark that got in the way of the Ikeboshi, but the angry tinker swung at the monster and ordered it out of the way. He swung his sword and the monster was engulfed in bright sizzling flames. The enemy was amazed that the Ikeboshi was able to vaporize all the water. Still, she had not expected anything less from the pigeon blood. She was sorry she couldn't get her hands on the red diamond and already regretted laughing at the Kurotobi. Her dragon made a sharp maneuver and flew upwards, but it was already enough for the girl that she was able to fulfill her minimum. Ikeboshi had almost no strength left and dropped his sword from his hands. Sighing heavily, he fell to his knees. The artisan tried with his last strength to stay on his feet, but he fell to the ground. He didn't understand how the enemies were able to know about this place. Besides, they had somehow managed to break through their barrier. Ikeboshi grabbed at his clothes and was horrified to think that the thing in his body could have served as a decoy. The artisan slammed his fist on the ground with anger. The image of his smiling disciple Kai stood before his eyes and Ikeboshi lashed out. His anger was so strong that everything around him burned with bright flames. Meanwhile, somewhere on top of the mountain, a man was lying on the edge of a cliff. He thought about the words of his partner who told him not to worry about anything. Yukari said she could do the job herself. Kurotobi thought that if he came closer, he would be noticed, so he decided to wait for Yukari at the very spot they had agreed upon. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a large dragon that flew out almost next to his feet. Kurotobi raised himself up and greeted the returning Yukari. He immediately wondered where their red diamond guy was and the girl looked away from him. Kurotobi immediately understood and a smirk appeared on his face. Yukari abruptly grabbed his face, but Kurotobi didn't understand what she did it for. The disgruntled Yukari already knew he was going to laugh at her. Kurotobi decided to check the connection and asked how he could be heard. He reported that the Yukari had managed to break the barrier and turn the guy into stone, but they hadn't managed to take him away. The man on the other side said that was quite good, but even that outcome was a severe blow to the pigeon blood. Now, all they needed from the red diamond guy was for him to become an absolute uncut diamond. Kurigane called out to Mr. Ikeboshi, but the artisan apologized to Kurigane and said he had failed to capture the enemy. He asked about Ku and Benito, and Kurigane said they were fine. They were now keeping an eye on the Kai. Kurigane was obviously angry and worried about something. Ikeboshi bowed to the boy and apologized for putting him in such danger. The artisan shouldn't have dragged him into all this. Kurigane felt embarrassed, but Ikeboshi had something else he wanted to say to him. He wanted to thank the guy for fighting for the Kai. Ikeboshi apologized to Kurigane and asked him to step aside, but Kurigane didn't know what he meant. Ikeboshi folded the seal on his hand and said he wanted to find out something. As soon as he folded the seal, the entire building from the store was under a protective barrier. Kurigane was surprised that the enemies didn't even break their barrier. Ikeboshi explained that they had opened it carefully and precisely. The ore barrier was created by the combination of 5,000 minerals, and to open it you had to know the exact combination. Benito had returned to the store before Ikeboshi put up the barrier, and it certainly couldn't have been him, which meant that Ku could have been involved. But Ikeboshi didn't even want to think about such a thing. Kurigane was concerned about Ikeboshi's behavior, but the tinker smiled and said he was fine. He apologized for keeping him waiting and offered to go inside. When Ikeboshi opened the doors, there was a Ku standing in front of him that called out to the teacher. Ikeboshi and Kurigane went up to the top floor to see her, and the artisan apologized for their escape. Ku exclaimed that she was sorry and tears appeared in her eyes. After all, she was supposed to be his bodyguard, but even with Kai standing right in front of her, she couldn't do anything about it. The girl started to cry and repeated that she was sorry, but Ikeboshi grabbed her shoulders and asked her to listen to him. He believed that everything that happened was entirely his fault. Ku believed it was not, but Ikeboshi interrupted her and asked her to listen. She shouldn't be looking for someone to blame right now, and all she should be thinking about right now was what they should do next. Kurigane, meanwhile, kept his eyes on the tinker, and Ku tried to calm herself down and wiped away her tears. She pounded her chest and said that the captain of the 1st Sakan Division had been urgently sent to them, and she would also like to prepare and join the rescue division. She asked for permission to leave the Kai on the Ikeboshi, and the tinker agreed. After their conversation, the Ikeboshi approached the petrified statue of his apprentice who was guarded by a Benito. But overcoming all his feelings, he walked past the Kai. Kurigane didn't understand how this was possible, but Benito and Ikeboshi only looked at the guy questioningly. Kurigane didn't understand how Ikeboshi could be so calm and why all of this had to be his fault. The guy felt that he should have been the one to save the Kai and sadly lowered his head. He was close, even before the Kai was turned to stone. But he didn't understand anything and wished he had come to him sooner. After all, the Kai was also his first real customer. Kurigane was horrified that he had let him die so easily. But Ikeboshi reassured Kurigane, and taking off his outer garments said that Kai was still alive. That was why they had to do everything in their power to save him. As for the feelings they were experiencing now, they were feelings of guilt, regret, and the like. Ikeboshi felt that all of that could wait for now. Benito called out to Ikeboshi and wanted to say something to him about the Kai. Benito listened to his stony voice. He was insignificant, but Benito could feel his heartbeat and vitality. Ikeboshi was right when he said that the Kai was still alive. Benito offered to do his best to find a way to cure him. At this point, Ikeboshi was led away and leaned on the railing while agreeing with Benito. The artisan apologized to Benito and asked him to give him a stone similar to the Kaya. But Benito hesitated to answer. He asked Kurogane to fulfill his request and his disciple ran to another room. Benito wanted to ask Ikeboshi about his plans. Before the teacher returned the Kai to the Federation, he wanted to put a ruby transmitter on him. Benito wasn't sure if Ikeboshi wanted to give it to the Federation. The artisan replied that he was counting on Mew Mew and felt exactly the same way as Benito. But the result of this was right in front of them. For Ku's sake, Ikeboshi also wouldn't want anything else to get out of hand. The Mine Federation was the safest place for him right now. With those words, Ikeboshi used his power on the stone shards that Kurogane had brought him. The stone sand cracked and turned into an earring. Benito realized what Ikeboshi wanted to do. If you made an earring with a ruby, you could trace its location even if there was no stone inside. Ikeboshi replaced the earring on the Kai's ear and said it was done. At that moment, the doors opened and the Ku apologized for the delay. She noticed that her tiger was acting strangely and looking toward the front door. They began knocking on the doors and demanded that they be opened. Voices said it was the Aenebai guards. Ikeboshi did not expect this, but the Ku explained that this place was not subject to the power of the Federation. Therefore, the guards would take the Kai under their protection for the time being. The Ku opened the doors and the person in front of her assumed she was a member of the Federation. The girl introduced herself to Ko and said she was a member of the 1st Division Audit Bureau in the Eastern Division. The man introduced the Aonomi guards and said they were under the direct command of the Overmarin of the 12 Stone Pillars. The Red Diamond guy was to go under their protection immediately, and they were going to take his Ikeboshi teacher into custody. Benito and Kurogane were shocked, and Ku frowned. It was hard for her to hear this, but Ikeboshi speculated that it might have happened. The artisan warned Benito that they were mere customers to him. Besides, he shouldn't have cared what they told him and Benito understood him. Ku asked to stop and said that she would personally like to arrest Ikeboshi. The artisan approached his apprentice and asked Kai to wait for him a little longer. He touched his petrified apprentice's hand in farewell. Ikeboshi swore to the Kai that he would settle the matter. Ku went upstairs to Ikeboshi and called out to him. The artisan lowered his eyes and apologized for embarrassing her, but Ku apologized for that as well. She took the rope and tied Ikeboshi's hands with them. The soldiers said they would refer him to the head of the Aenebai mines, Lord Tsuzumi. As the troop was leaving with Ikeboshi, Kurogane couldn't stand it and shouted. She shouted to the Ikeboshi that they had not yet paid them for the goods. Benito smiled sadly and advised them to go back in that case. In the meantime, they would continue to work on their perfect weapons. Kurogane promised that this weapon would be so cool that none of their savings would be enough and it would cost a lot of money. Benito supported his apprentice and said that they would wait for them back, and in the meantime they would improve the Kai's weapon. Benito thought, or rather was sure, that they would still come back to them. In the Aenebai mine Samite, a soldier told his lord that he had exceeded his lunch time by 30 seconds. The lord tapped his chopsticks on his plate of food and agreed with him. Meanwhile, Ikeboshi was thinking about how he could get out of here as quickly as possible. He needed to find out how to get the Kai back. But he should have avoided violence, and Ikeboshi thought about the Aquamarine from the Apostles. Aquamarine was a guy named Tsuzumi. A disgruntled Tsuzumi poured the leftover stones into his mouth and asked him to stop molesting him while he checked the quality control. Ikeboshi didn't understand why, of all people, it had to be him. But it looked like there was nothing else for him to do but spring into action. Ku arrived at the Aenebai mines in the Water Palace. The girl, as a member of the Federation, was asked to wait here and Ku agreed. Ku thought sadly of Ikeboshi and hoped he was alright. The 12 pillars were a group of first-class ore artisans chosen by the Federation, but each pillar had a different level of trust in the Federation. The girl thought that Mr. Tsuzumi and Mr. Ikeboshi didn't get along well with each other. The artisan thought of Tsuzumi and frowned. He knew the man hated the Federation, so he thought he would help him get out of his arrest. Well, Tsuzumi always had some sort of problem with him whenever they met. To be honest, Ikeboshi didn't want to bow to him, but he thought he had no choice in this case. Ikeboshi's escort knocked on the doors, after which they went inside. He told Lord Tsuzumi that the man who had been transferred to the Eastern Division was with him. No sooner had they gone inside than Lord Tsuzumi shouted and attacked Ikeboshi from the threshold. Ikeboshi took on the water shockwave and tried to hold it back, but the wave was so strong that it threw the tinker backwards, causing him to hit his back hard against the wall. The disgruntled lord told Ikeboshi that he hoped he would never see his face again. Lord Tsuzumi was the Aquamarine of the 12 pillars and also the head of the Donibai mines. Ikeboshi frowned and said that he did not doubt his hospitality. With those words, he tore off several slabs from the floor which flashed his bright flames. The soldier accompanying him was surprised, for the shackles should have suppressed his guiding power. The Lord ordered the underling to lower his weapon. He felt that it would not even make a decent dog collar. Ikeboshi decided to attack the Tsuzumi and aimed his fire slabs at him. Lord Tsuzumi easily repelled his fire attacks with water and smirked, deciding that someone had lost their grip. As soon as he said that, his face sharply distorted with a grimace. One of the small slabs of fire did stab him in the leg. Ikeboshi thought that Tsuzumi had risen so high that he had become short-sighted. Lord Tsuzumi thought that the tinker was acting rather arrogant, and thus pissed him off. Ikeboshi was surprised when his attack wave cut his arm rope. Tsuzumi said that talking to him only got on his nerves and asked the tinker to move away from him. Lord Tsuzumi crunched his fingers and said that if the tinker could talk to these bad guys, then maybe he would listen to him. Ikeboshi didn't think he was capable of listening and admitted that he had become quite intelligent. Tsuzumi swung his fist at Ikeboshi, but the tinker dodged to the side and swung back at the Lord. Ikeboshi thought Tsuzumi was huge, so aimed to knock him down, but he didn't expect Lord Tsuzumi to grab his leg with his hand and flop him on his back. While Ikeboshi was lying on the ground, the Lord approached him and told the artisan that he was rather indecisive. He stepped on his back and said that he removed the responsibility of the stone pillar, and even ran away from the Federation. And this time he took some troublesome kid as his apprentice, and as a result he destroyed half the city. Even after that, he selfishly asked to continue his journey. Lord Tsuzumi wanted to hit Ikeboshi that he was able to dodge and said that Ikeboshi failed to protect his student. The Lord leaned over the artisan and thought that he felt so pathetic that he was about to cry. But a slight smirk appeared on the Ikeboshi's face, whereupon he jumped to his feet. Rather, he was ready to die from such humiliation. He wanted to hit the Lord with his foot, who dodged to the side and suggested that in that case, he should go to hell soon. With those shouts, Tsuzumi hit Ikeboshi in the shoulder area. He was surprised when he noticed that the tinker had a strange texture of stone on his shoulder. Ikeboshi took advantage of the situation and grabbed the Lord and then felled him to the ground. He was indeed ready to die from this humiliation, but he couldn't afford to die just now. With those words, he plowed Lord Tsuzumi to the floor. Tsuzumi clutched his head and admitted that the Ikeboshi had a good run at him. The craftsman addressed him as a stone eater. He said that the one who turned his student into stone was a young woman who was a stone eater with black horns. Tsuzumi doubted his words, but Ikeboshi said it was without doubt. The Lord showed an image of the very same girl and Ikeboshi confirmed that it was her. Tsuzumi said that the girl's name was Yukari and she had been a wanted girl since she was a child. She had befriended stone beasts and was capable of anything from stealing to murder. She was a disgrace to their people. Tsuzumi told Ikeboshi that he had always been a resourceful bastard. Ikeboshi apologized to the Lord and said it was his only option now. He bowed to Lord Tsuzumi and said that he would like to save his student at any cost. Ikeboshi was willing to give the Lord his help in catching her, so he asked for his help as well. When Tsuzumi thought about the significance of the red diamond and the fact that he refused Miu Miu's offer of protection, such a mistake was inevitable for him. However, arresting Ikeboshi for failing to protect his student was unnecessary. Tsuzumi smoked from his pipe and smirked. He saw one of the former pillars bowing to him and thought it was worth it. Therefore, he was willing to give the Ikeboshi a helping hand. Ikeboshi frowned at Lord Suzuki and thanked him. The Lord thought it sounded kind of insincere and asked him to repeat his words of thanks. Ikeboshi repeated himself, though he was annoyed by it. Tsuzumi remembered the time when they first met. Back then, he knew an artisan who had no conviction or stubbornness. His light-hearted laugh suited him quite well, and Lord Tsuzumi thought he was a mean fool who ran if anything went wrong. And after all this time, he finally found something to hold on to. While Ku was in the room waiting, someone knocked on her door and asked for permission to enter. Ku bowed and greeted the teacher, or rather the chief of the first division. She tapped herself and apologized for not being able to do her duty. Sakin stroked the distraught girl's head and said with a smile that her safety was paramount. Ku couldn't stand it and cried, after which she hugged her teacher. When Kai woke up, there was only emptiness and darkness in front of his eyes. He slowly got to his feet and tried to realize where he was. He called out to Ku and Ikeboshi, but no one was there. There was some huge shadow lurking in the Kai's subconscious that was still slumbering within him. The hero looked down at his bare feet and thought about what he had just done. He was sure he had just been arguing with Ikeboshi. But then the hero looked at his hands and remembered how he had been turned to stone. In that case, the Kai didn't understand why he could still move. It was as if he was in another world and tried to figure out where he was. His question was answered by some stranger who stood behind him and said that they were in an ore vein. This was where the souls of all the stones were gathered. Kai looked at the stranger in surprise and asked who he was. His red hair was quite beautiful and it made the hero tremble. The man with the blindfold smiled and said that he didn't have a name, but he was here to guide Kai. The hero was surprised that the stranger knew his name, but the man smiled and said he knew everything about him. He told how the hero had been turned into stone, and now he was a stone soul moved here in the ore vein. That was why he could move freely here. Kai was shocked as his left leg was intact and back to normal. Kai began to realize what this meant and quickly looked around. The stranger loomed in the air in front of him and asked what was wrong with him. The hero assumed that if no one else was here, it meant no one else was petrified, and apparently he was right. The hero spat on the ground in relief, and the stranger replied that this was not a place that anyone could have gotten into. Kai was here out of the fact that he had high attunement scores, but still the stranger asked him to be careful. His guiding power was still weak, so side effects could show up. Kai was surprised and asked again about his guiding power. The stranger replied that it was correct and said that all the artisans relied on the ore vein when they used the guiding power. With these words, he heated the ore and turned it into a diamond, which surprised the hero. The stranger replied that this force was doing just that. This power that guided like a trumpet, and the energy that flowed through that pipe was the energy of the ore vein. Kai froze in place from such a sight. Right in front of him was bubbling like a shimmering huge waterfall. Kai tried to come to his senses and shook his head, trying to keep his mind on it. The stranger pulled Kai along and said he could show him a more beautiful place than this. There was also an opal rainbow here, as well as a sphalerite flower field. Also, the stranger had almost forgotten about the Edencia, a labradorite sky. Kai was confused and asked to wait just a minute. The hero apologized and said he had to go back and asked to be told where there was an exit here. The man looked at the Kai in surprise and said that there was no exit here. He clarified that the guy meant turning back into a human, but that was impossible. Kai silently turned away from him and ran the other way, but the stranger asked where he was going. He offered to show Kai what he wanted to see, but the hero thanked him and declined. The hero decided to find his own way out, and the stranger puffed up his cheeks resentfully. At the same moment, a huge stone wall appeared right in front of the hero. The stranger was angry and tried to find out what the Kai was leaving here for. He had waited quite a long time to meet the hero and wanted to talk and play with him even more, but the Kai exclaimed that he couldn't do that and he didn't have time. The stranger used an invisible force and asked the hero to shut up and sit down. He tried to distract the Kai and showed him his all sorts of favorite rocks. The hero, of course, was surprised by this and thought he would stay here for a while. The man wanted to know which of these diamonds the guy wanted and recommended one of them. He said that this stone would definitely suit him, and Kai took the beautiful stone in his hands with delight. As soon as the hero took the diamond in his hands, everything around him began to be covered as if with fog. It was something soft that the stranger fell on. He smiled and said he had made a Mesolithic mattress. He had reduced its hardness and crystal size to make it soft. Kai marveled at this, even though it stabbed him a little. The man offered Kai a little nap, and the hero thought it sounded pretty great. Kai lay on the soft mattress for a while, then looked at the sleeping stranger and got to his feet. Hardly had he tried to sneak away when the stranger called out to him, and the Kai jumped up in fear. The stranger was curious to know why the hero wanted to go back so badly and what he was going to do after he returned. He didn't realize what his return would change. After all, if a weakling like him came back, the people around him would protect him again. Besides, Kai was nothing but trouble from him. The stranger asked him to think about the fact that people were relieved when he disappeared. The hero lowered his head and did not deny that it could have turned out that way, but it would be irresponsible for him to just give up like that. At the same moment, a crystalline huge wall reappeared behind his back. Kai turned towards it and resolutely grabbed onto the ledge, climbing up the wall like a ladder. The stranger was clearly not going to let him go and ran towards the hero. He shouted that if the hero stayed here, he would give him anything he wanted and it would always be safe here. But the Kai apologized to him and told him that he had unfinished business. The stranger reminded him that there was no way out here, but Kai assumed that was just his opinion. The stranger once again asked him to stop and said he could reunite him with his family. Kai was so startled to hear this that his foot suddenly slipped down. A shard of rock crumbled and the hero fell to a lower step. The stranger reminded him of what he had spoken of earlier. This was the place where the stone souls were gathered and he could bring his family here, and then they could live happily and there would be constant fun here. But the hero refused and was determined to cure them himself. The stranger still didn't understand why he wanted to leave this place so badly. After all, the Kai could wait for the one who would cure him, but the hero was not going to wait for that. He felt he had to leave as soon as possible and as fast as he could. He thought about his teacher and decided that he should have come back before he did anything. And if Kai had made sure that his teacher would be relieved that he would never come back, then he would have been different. If he thought his teacher had given up after failing to find a way to cure petrification, he would have been fine. And if they all didn't care, things would be much easier. As the hero climbed up another ledge, he heard a voice asking him to stop. Kai squinted at the sudden and bright flash of light. When his eyes adjusted, he saw a huge glittering stone dragon in front of him. Kai stared in surprise at the large dragon, who told the human child that he had honed himself with the help of others. The dragon replied that he had the right to pass a test, but Kai had no idea what the test of the mysterious dragon might have been. The mysterious dragon told the boy that he would give him a test. Kai didn't understand what he meant, but he assumed that if he passed the test, he could go back. But the dragon said that going back was impossible. Kai was shocked and didn't understand who was creating such trials then. But if he passed this test, his guiding power would become extremely powerful. The stranger called out to the Kai, and the dragon told the hero that he originally had no choice. And if he refused, the dragon would devour his soul here and now. The stranger tried to stop the dragon and said that Kai had arrived here recently and was still confused. But the Kai was determined to do so, which surprised the man with the blindfold. The dragon said it was very good, and the rocks under the hero's feet began to crack sharply. His entire stone wall began to collapse and the hero flew down with screams. At last the dragon said that he would have only one test. His test would be in this ore mountain. The hero had to find the most valuable stone in this pile of stones by himself and bring it to the dragon. Meanwhile, the Saken listened to the report in the underwater castle. He told the rest of the division captains that they had passed through the ore barrier. Ashimi suggested that there must be a very strong technique at the enemy's disposal. If such a technique really existed, they were very unlucky. They must have overheard to know the combination of the barrier. The crystal that was on the Ku's belt suddenly sparkled, and Saken asked her what kind of crystal it was. The girl replied that it was a protective amulet that Lady Miu had given her. Saken began to suspect that this crystal was involved in all this. Saken thought the clasp on the Ku's cloak had come off and asked her to stay put until he fixed it. Saken took one of the Ku crystals and clicked it, then turned to Captain Chitos. Saken threw the crystal in his direction and asked him to be careful, for there was a stink bug, and the captain screamed. Chitos as if he had gone mad and smashed the crystal, screaming that he hated bugs. While Chitos was begging to get him out of here, Ku looked questioningly at the teacher. Saken smiled and asked her to keep quiet about it. A soldier approached Saken and Ku and notified that Lord Tsuzumi wanted to see them. He led them down the corridor and asked them to enter the room in question. When Ku and Saken went inside, they saw Ikeboshi and Tsuzumi. Ku had never seen Lord Tsuzumi before and kept her eyes on him. Saken told him that the captain of the 1st Division of the Inspection Bureau of the Eastern Division of Saken had arrived. Ikeboshi meanwhile was happy to see that Ku had recovered, and the girl greeted Mr. Ikeboshi. She ran up to him in tears and squealed that she was very happy that he was okay. Ikeboshi smiled and apologized for making her worry. Ku looked at his hands in surprise and noticed that there were no shackles on them. Tsuzumi said that there was something that needed to be cleared up before they started chatting. Tsuzumi wanted to find out from Saken and Ku what their purpose and position was in this whole situation, and also to find out what they wanted to do with Ikeboshi and the guy's body. Tsuzumi was not only a pillar of stone, he was also the lord of these mines, and as lord he wanted to catch Kuretobai's accomplice, a stone eater named Yukari. So he didn't care about the red diamond, but he keeps Mr. Former Stone Pillar here as a source of information. As Kai's teacher, Ikeboshi wanted to track down Kuretobai in order to save Kai. But as long as he knew that Kai was in a safe place, he had nothing more to ask for. The Federation demanded that they protect the Kai and Mr. Ikeboshi, and if Mr. Ikeboshi stayed here, the two would be separated. Ku looked questioningly at her Sakona teacher and waited for his answer. Saken replied that the Federation has two goals. The first is to arrest the Kuretobai for the crimes they have committed, and the second is to bring the petrified humans back to normal. And if that was Lord Tsuzumi's order, then Saken was willing to entrust the Ikeboshi to them. But as for the Kai, there was a chance they would be attacked again during the trip, and the Saken felt it would be best to protect him here. Such an answer was surprising to the Ku and Ikeboshi. In that case, it was settled, and Lord Tsuzumi decided that he would keep Ikeboshi and his apprentice here by his side. Tsuzumi told the boys that they would find and beat the crap out of Kuretobai and Yukari. That made things easier, and Lord Suzuki asked to follow him. Ikeboshi looked at the Ku and noticed her crystal was missing. Ikeboshi looked at Saken and wanted to make sure he was sure. Saken smiled and said she was just providing a good reason. Ikeboshi smiled at the Ku and acknowledged that she had a pretty cool teacher. Ku glowed with happiness and said that she was. But Ku admitted to Ikeboshi that she didn't expect that from Tsuzumi. She thought he was pretty scary. Ikeboshi asked her to just observe in order to understand everything. But Ku didn't understand what he meant. As soon as Lord Tsuzumi opened the doors, a bunch of people surrounded him. They all pestered the Lord with their various requests. Some asked to see his artificial stone and some asked to see his prototype. Some wanted to hear Lord Tsuzumi's opinion on a specific price. There were even children who offered to play with them. Tsuzumi couldn't stand it and shouted at the people, demanding that they stop. He said that he had guests, so he would only take care of urgent matters. He ordered the people to line up from the smallest to the largest status. He apologized to the kids and asked them to give him literally 5 minutes. Ku looked at the kids that really wanted to play with the Lord and noticed that he was quite popular. At first glance, Tsuzuma was hard to approach, but people gathered around him nonetheless. Ikeboshi thought that it was all because of his determination and responsibility in managing the Stone Eaters, and that was felt by all the people that were here. After all, Lord Tsuzumi was the one who created their sea. Ku stared at Ikeboshi in surprise, not believing his words. The Lord apologized for the wait and motioned for them to go forward. They entered a large underwater dome that was completely transparent. The entire underwater world was revealed here, which the Ku was fascinated by. The Lord went inside and called out to the Uno. Saken assumed they were at the top of the mine and Ikeboshi thought the same. Ku was thrilled to see so many machines that were inside. The girl who was sitting in the other room saw Lord Tsuzumi and assumed he had guests. The Lord replied to Uno that he was too busy because she wasn't doing her job well. Uno couldn't believe it, but admitted that it was her fault. She smiled and said that today she had a feeling that she would see one great Orvane. However, it was rather unusual that he had brought people from the Federation here. Lord Tsuzumi corrected the clothes on Uno and reminded her of what he had asked of her earlier. He asked not to wear such revealing clothes and Ku compared him to a real gentleman. Ikeboshi thought he was rather innocent in such matters. The Lord ordered Uno to start water vision, but Uno was not clear where he was looking. Ku was curious and she asked Mr. Ikeboshi in a whisper what he meant by underwater vision. Lord Tsuzumi thought they would understand everything faster if he just showed them and asked him to prepare the water pumping. Uno smiled and told the Lord that everything was ready. Tsuzumi folded the seal and concentrated. Then his stone on his hand shone with a bright flash. Tsuzumi used the powers of aquamarine and obsidian to create something like a dome for the entire city. Tsuzumi opened his eyes and used the shining water vision. Ku was delighted when the entire sea gathered as if into one water ball and floated. The incredible azure miracle was happening right in front of the protagonist's eyes. This sea was created by aquamarine Tsuzumi. Tsuzumi dispersed a large volume of water with his monstrous guiding force. All of his guiding force went straight into the sky. The huge ball of water could be seen from anywhere on the mainland. In that water, the Uno used their obsidian spiritual eye to find the mark. This was what they called water vision. But Ku still didn't understand what Mark Ikeboshi was talking about. The thing is that there was water left on the Yukari from here, that was the mark. Ku was shocked that they were looking for such a small mark. It only showed how sharp the spiritual eye was. With such an eye, she could even find a grain of sand in the desert. Uno was the secretary of the Lord of the Onibai Mines, the gem that was obsidian. Her ability was to search with a guiding force. While Yukari was sitting on the stone dragon, she noticed many water droplets started to form from all directions. One of the drops fell right on her face and Uno exclaimed that she had found them. Yukari was at 43 degrees north latitude and 125 degrees west longitude. One of the soldiers handed Lord Suzuki a map and the Lord thanked him. He opened the map and looked at it. On the map was the location of the dragon neck base. The mines of the Anibai were near the middle of the torso, and it looked like it had already gone over the first 2 peaks of the dorsal fin mountain. Saken looked carefully at the map and recognized the location. They were on the spine of the great dragon. It was the largest nest of stone beasts in the entire continent. It all sounded pretty logical and looked like a place where the Yaokari could establish their base. Saken asked the Ikeboshi when they should have moved out there. The artisan replied that they would be moving out tomorrow morning. Saken was surprised that they were heading there tomorrow. If her only goal was to turn the Kai into stone, then they had a chance of her continuing to run away, so they should have hurried. It became clear to Saken. He said that he would arrange for the urgent dispatch of the flying dragon and Ikeboshi thanked him. Ku told the teacher that she should have contacted Captain Yuan and Saken thought it was a good idea. After Uno finished, she pounced on Ikeboshi and told Akarin that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. The artisan smiled and told the girl that she was as energetic as ever. Uno exclaimed that there was no problem with that. Uno called Ikeboshi Akarin and suggested that his body had become even more problematic. Uno thought it had something to do with the way he kept rushing things and Suzuki cowered at Ikeboshi. Ikeboshi couldn't help it and said it was fine. Lord Suzuki still looked at the tinker with the same frown. Uno turned away from Ikeboshi and admitted that she could never understand him. Ikeboshi turned to Tsuzumi and asked for a favor to watch over the Kai tomorrow. Lord thought that by doing so, Ikeboshi meant to say that he would fight alone. But Ikeboshi said that was not the case. The artisan talked about the Kai's safety, position in society, and Suzuki's influence. Ikeboshi noticed that something strange was going on with the Mew Mew. He didn't know how dirty the Federation was right now, but as one of the 12 pillars, he shouldn't make a move just yet. Tsuzumi hesitated for a moment, but after a while, he was called by Sakin and notified that Lady Mew Mew was calling for him. Lord Tsuzumi went to Lady Mew Mew, but Ikeboshi wanted to go with him. Tsuzumi was against it and told the artisan that he would only be in the way. The disgruntled Ikeboshi was annoyed by his answer but stopped. Lord waved his hand and told the artisan that his fake innocent tone was like a tiger pretending to be a cat, which gave him goosebumps. Lastly, Tsuzumi suggested that Ikeboshi leave everything to him and rest. The overjoyed Uno offered to show Ikeboshi his room in that case. It seemed to the craftsman that Tsuzumi was harder to understand. Ikeboshi lay down on the bed in his room, staring at the ceiling and thinking. Meanwhile, it was already nightfall outside. Shirai told the others that it was quite a beautiful place here. Even this sea water in the power of Tsuzumi was the safest place, and even the stone sea beasts couldn't get in here. Ikeboshi approached the Shirai and asked him to open it for a moment. The Shirai frowned at the tinker, then told him the code to the lock. She pushed out the captain that was guarding the Kai and left with him. Ikeboshi immediately understood this code, which meant copper, lead, and silver. He assembled the seal, whereupon the doors opened and he saw the Kai statue. Ikeboshi swore to his student that they would extract information from the Kurotobai on how to cure him, so he had to wait a little longer. He also asked him not to be afraid for pushing himself too hard. Since that night when Kai got mad at him, Ikeboshi had been thinking a lot and realized something. The happiness he had desired so much all along was a happiness he could only achieve by disappearing from this world. But now things had become different. With these words, he touched the petrified hand of his disciple. Ikeboshi smiled and said that all he wanted was to travel once more with the Kai. That was why he would only live to be near the Kai. At that moment, the petrified hand of the Kai glowed with a blinding light, and Ikeboshi froze with surprise. At the same moment, the captains rushed into the room trying to figure out what that light was. Ikeboshi told the guys that he was fine and Shirai asked about what happened. But Ikeboshi rounded his eyes and admitted he had the same question. Shirai wanted to make sure that everything was really okay and Ikeboshi looked at his hand. He glanced restlessly at the Kai and thought about the flash of light. Later, all the captains of the Federation decided to split into teams. The masked captain said that one emergency flying dragon would be here. The Ku and Sakin would accompany the Ikeboshi, and everyone else would be here to protect the Kai. The truth is that Sakin would like to call in more people to fight the Kurotobai, but the masked man highly discouraged this, for Lady Mew Mew was in a very bad mood. Ikeboshi thought he was right and he should not have burdened Sakin and Ku. Ku didn't understand what he was saying and got angry. She exclaimed that she wanted to save Kai as much as he did and Ikeboshi thanked her. Lord Tsuzumi called out to Ikeboshi and the tinker looked back. Tsuzumi threw a small ball in his hands and asked him to use this if the Kurotobai decided to escape. Ikeboshi understood and replied that he would use it gratefully. Lastly, the tinker climbed on the stone dragon and shouted to the Lord that he trusted the Kaya to him. After this, Sakin, Ku, and Ikeboshi set out on their journey. Sakin said they were half an hour away from the dragon's vertebrae, and Ikeboshi thought she was right, and if they continued at the same pace, they would soon reach the place. Suddenly, their dragons were attempted to be run over by a huge stone shark that the Akari was sitting on. The girl smiled and assumed they were looking for someone. Kurotobai was also here and told the pigeon blood that they hadn't seen each other in a while. The man smirked and thought that Ikeboshi was looking for a fight. Earlier, the stone dragon asked Kai to find the most valuable stone for him and bring it to him. And if the Kai failed in this task, his soul would be devoured. In fact, the problem was far from finding a single stone in the pile. Kai took a handful of stones in his hands and thought about what was of value. Meanwhile, the Kurotobai with the Ikeboshi entered the battle. Ikeboshi tried to strike the shark with his sword and aimed the dragon upwards, but Kurotobai tried to knock it down with a long sharp splinter. Suddenly, the dragon under Ikeboshi jerked. Kurotobai aimed the blow between the wings of the dragon where the tinker was sitting and the Ikeboshi flew down. Ku noticed this and screamed at the Ikeboshi, but he still managed to grab the leash on the dragon. He barely turned his head when he noticed a stone shark with sharp teeth in front of him. The artisan swung his sword and cut the jaws of the stone shark. Kurotobai jumped on the artisan and swung his staff. He shouted that now he was starting to like it. Ku got there in time and grabbed Ikeboshi's arm with her whip. She hoped he was okay and the tinker thanked her for her help. Saken suggested that the Ikeboshi split up and grab them. The stone shark wanted to strike their dragon, but there was a barrier in front of it, which it hit. Ikeboshi asked the Ku to let it go and the girl listened. Hirotobai jumped off his stone shark and asked the pigeon blood to catch him. He was sure that the artisan would not leave him at that spot and Ikeboshi asked not to doubt it. The artisan jumped towards him and asked him to have patience. At the same time, the Kai was looking for a valuable stone in the middle of a mountain of stones. He supposed it could be a ruby, spinel, garnet, but it all seemed wrong to him. Kai clutched his head and wished he had a refractometer or a spectroscope with him, also a polarizing device. The stranger with the blindfold told the boy that all the diamonds were here and he could always find them. Kai was surprised at that, but to say a diamond was valuable would be too easy. The stranger suggested that all people loved diamonds. Most people did love diamonds, which was why there were so many conflicts over them. It seemed to the stranger that Kai really hated the red diamond. The guy thought about it and admitted that he really hated it before, but the teacher told him that the gems just existed by themselves and were not to blame for anything. Besides, Kai was saved by the gem, and now he thought he could live with the thought of loving him. His acquaintance smiled and agreed with him. Kai was surprised that his acquaintance didn't have a name, but it was true. It seemed strange to the hero that he couldn't call him anything, and it would be easier if he had a name. The stranger suddenly became animated and suggested that Kai come up with a name for him. For some reason, he really wanted Kai to name him. It was a big responsibility for the hero and he asked for time to think about it. The stranger decided that he would find more diamonds for him in the meantime, and the hero agreed with him. He wished his new acquaintance would calm down a bit. Kai looked at the gems and thought about the fact that they just existed. In that case, it was people who gave them significance. He separated the gems from ordinary stones, but they were ordinary stones. Here the Kai remembered the words of the Mew Mew. The old woman had assumed that Ikeboshi had been kind to him just because he had a red diamond. But the artisan fought for the Kai and thought of his way of life and determination. And if you take all that away, he is no more than just a red diamond. Kai struck his hands against the crystals and there was a rumbling sound. Kai had no idea that he was so stupid and that the diamond could have value. And if he picked one of these gems here, he would be no better than those trying to take possession of his red diamond. In such a case, the hero tried to understand what the value should mean. Ikeboshi made him his disciple, not because he had the red diamond. The artisan saw how the Kai lived in this village and how he refused to give up and lived a life of radiating light. He saw the spark in his eyes when he vowed to heal his family. And if people do not desire this, all stones will not shine, they will be the most ordinary pebbles. Kai thought it was all about wishing, and it made sense to him. He didn't have to look for value in these stones and told his new acquaintance that he understood everything. Kai thought of those who decided and determined the value of the stones. A guy picked up a diamond and a stone, then used his power on them and they glowed. Those who decided and determined the value of the stones were the people. Hirotobai thought that Ikeboshi had never thrown fire at him before. Ikeboshi glanced silently at Hirotobai and the man thought the artisan was ignoring him. They snapped out of their seats at the same time. Hirotobai swung his staff and admitted that he felt very lonely about it. He swung his staff, but Ikeboshi ducked and avoided his blow. At the same moment he drew his sword and tried to strike from below, but Hirotobai swung his staff and fended off all subsequent blows. Hirotobai kept fighting back and realized that he could not win as long as he used the spearhead. He was about to jump back and change his tactics, but he didn't have time. At the same moment, he caught a powerful blow to his head and flew off into the wall of the building behind him. Ikeboshi approached his wounded opponent and said it was not his choice not to use fire. Ikeboshi just didn't see the need for it. Hirotobai smirked and thought that Ikeboshi really does have bad manners. Ikeboshi put his sword away in its scabbard and thought about his words. The artisan made a U-turn, after which his body burst into flames. He decided that he would behave appropriately in such a case. Right now, Antimonite's petrifying power and his pigeon blood must be in conflict in Ikeboshi's body. In Hirotobai's opinion, he shouldn't have been able to do techniques that required a large amount of guiding force. Ikeboshi was going to use the ruby, which made the Hirotobai tense up. The artisan used a blast of burning light which caused a powerful explosion. Hirotobai jumped aside and thought it was close. The artisan squeezed that flame to the limit and it turned into a cannon. Hirotobai touched the ground with his palm and used a tsunami of black blades. At the same instant, a large number of sharp crystals rose from the ground. Ikeboshi jumped back and threw a few small pebbles from his bag at them. At the same moment there was an explosion and Hirotobai began to guess where Ikeboshi would attack from first. He could be on the left or he could be on the right. But his opponent was surprised when the artisan dashed straight through the center and swung his sword at him. Kurotobai had time to set up his staff and block the blow. The opponents fended off each other's blows at breakneck speed until they bounced away from each other to a safe distance. Ikeboshi had something he wanted to ask the Kurotobai. He still didn't understand why he had turned his student into stone. After all, if he only wanted the red diamond, there was no need to turn his entire body into stone at once. Ikeboshi wanted to know his true intentions, but Kurotobai replied that they were the same as Ikeboshi's. Kurotobai licked his lips and said he saw talent in the guy, which Ikeboshi didn't like. Kurotobai asked to think about what someone would do in such a situation. Someone whose body turned to stone. They will cut off his gem, that's all. Some fools will do it because they didn't want a foreign object in them. Other chumps will do it to get away from those who want their stones. Still others will gladly scrape it off their bodies to sell it. But the Kai was different, it accepted it, and even the red diamond was able to adjust to it. Kurotobai was certain it was the one. It was the Kai that was the uncut diamond. But Ikeboshi didn't understand what he meant. Kurotobai pounced on Ikeboshi and shouted that this guy was different from them, humans that were artificially created. Ikeboshi noticed that the tip of his spear staff had grown considerably. The artisan thought his enemy hated all gems because of those experiments, and Kurotobai could agree with him. That used to be true, but he envied their stunning beauty more, and then he realized something. If everyone becomes a beautiful gem, true happiness will finally come to this world. Kurotobai thought this must be true and reminded of people and their quarrels. It always started with discrimination. With these words, Kurotobai struck Ikeboshi with the tip of his raised spear. People always thought they were better than others or were relieved to look down on others, and they never tried to lift others off the bottom. Just to protect their precious status, they pushed those behind them and threw those ahead down the ladder. Such conflict seemed even dirtier than that of animals. New Kurotobai believed that all these quarrels would disappear when all people became beautiful stones. He jumped and aimed many splinters at the Ikeboshi, but the artisan dodged and repelled them with his flaming sword. Ikeboshi was able to wound Kurotobai's arm with a burst of fire, after which they again fought in close combat. Ikeboshi thought that Kurotobai might have been right and drops of blood fell to the ground. He was right that without envy and jealousy, the world would indeed be a better place. A craftsman once really thought the same thing. He grabbed the petrified point of a spear with his hand and said that there was no progress in such a world. And if it continues like this, nothing will change. Then there will be no future for these children. That's why Ikeboshi was going to stop Kurotobai. Kurotobai couldn't believe that the artisan was going to use just that. A bright flame erupted and Ikeboshi summoned a ruby volley of heavenly flames. Both opponents were significantly battered. Ikeboshi continued to hold the tip of his spear while Kurotobai used the pile of diamonds around him for defense. But Ikeboshi believed that victory was his. He put his blade to Kurotobai's throat and demanded to know how to save the boy. Kurotobai lowered his head and laughed. Ikeboshi's opponent thought it would be a good idea for the pigeon blood to shine even brighter for him. Kurotobai grinned as he placed his cheek against the blade of the Ikeboshi, and wondered if this was really his victory. He wished he hadn't heard such sad things. Kurotobai replied that this was only the beginning. At the same time, a mysterious figure appeared near the petrified body of the Kai in the shadow of their furious battle. The man told Chitos that Rasha had already arrived, but Chitos thought he was kind of early. The girl thought it was time for them to change guards and Chitos thought he was saved. But Rasha clearly didn't want to work. Chitos assumed that it was a bit hard for Rasha right after sending the dragon, but Shirai asked him not to be silly. It seemed to her that Chitos was being too soft on him. They had a manpower shortage and he had to work. Rasha agreed with them and clarified his task. He just had to work, but it was a real bore for him. Shirai didn't know what he meant and looked at the captain under the mask in surprise. Shirai noticed in time as Rasha grabbed his weapon and pushed Chitos aside. Rasha's blow went right through Shirai and Chitos called out to the wounded girl. Chitos didn't realize what Rasha was doing. Rasha as if he didn't hear him and used black agate to split the void. Rasha's ability was teleportation and Chitos ordered him to stop. Rasha tried to hit the walls protecting the Kai statue with his sword, but he failed. Shirai interrupted him and told him that Rasha was using the illusions of his appetite. Chitos decided they had had enough and swung his fist at Rasha, but the captain instantly disappeared. Rasha thought that was pretty good and that Chitos was as cunning as ever. It was a real morass for him, but he could tell that they had known each other for quite some time. Rasha could hide it with appetite, but the original would still be here. Chitos took a swing at his comrade, not realizing what was wrong with him. Rasha pushed back against Chitos's fist and replied that he knew his direction, and as long as he knew it, he could send it all at once. There was no way Shirai could stop him, and Chitos asked for it to stop. In an instant, the structure where the Kai was located disappeared. The huge water fist appeared right in front of Rasha and aimed at him, but the captain quickly dodged and moved away. Rasha finally met these people. Lord Tsuzumi told the others that it didn't look like the captain was under anyone's control. In that case, he promised Rasha that he would now suffocate and drown. But Uno thought that Tsuzumi couldn't do that. Shirai fell on her knees and apologized to Lord Tsuzumi. The fact that their target had already been moved, and the Rasha captain smiled. At the same instant, what he saw shocked Ikeboshi. He saw the walls of the cube that contained the petrified Kai. Ikeboshi didn't understand how he could have ended up right there. The craftsman was out of control, and the Kurotobai gave him a hard kick to the stomach. Ikeboshi flew backwards into the same building, and the Kurotobai said this was his punishment. The artisan felt his ruby reacting with that box, and it was undoubtedly real. But Ikeboshi was horrified when he saw that his left hand was completely petrified. Kurotobai smirked and ordered Ikeboshi to sit. Ikeboshi's hand pulled him down, and the artisan fell to the ground. Kurotobai thought this was funny and said that it was wrong, for the Ikeboshi lay down. The artisan realized that it must have been his ability to control the antimonite, and ordered his arm to move. Resisting with all his might, Ikeboshi jumped to his feet and ran at Kurotobai with shouts, but the opponent extended his arm in front of him and ordered him to stop. Kurotobai sent him back home, and Ikeboshi flew into the wall of the building behind him. The enemy smirked and suggested that he should have taken the pigeon blood for a short walk with him. Ikeboshi took a pair of kunai from his bag and threw them at the Kurotobai. The kunai slammed into the ground in front of Kurotobai's feet, and Ikeboshi said he was using the full potential of the magnetism of his magnetic boots. But the opponent exclaimed that it was useless. As Ikeboshi approached Kurotobai, he felt he couldn't breathe. He realized it was his anti-monite poison. Ikeboshi bounced to the side and fell down, thinking that even his pigeon blood couldn't hold him back. Suddenly, the walls where the Kai was located shone with a bright light. The light grew brighter and brighter, followed by an explosion. Kurotobai smirked and told the artisan that his apprentice was gifted, and the Kurotobai was delighted that the Kai had successfully passed the test, which only meant that even a Kurotobai could use a red diamond. It all depended on who was in control, and the Kurotobai extended his petrified hand to the guy. He told Mr. Diamond that he was the one who would get the most out of him. The artisan realized that he was going to use the red diamond and asked him to stop. Kurotobai told the Ikeboshi that he would now see with his own eyes how his apprentice was to be used. The Kai's body glowed. Kurotobai used his power and ordered the red diamond to go to him. A seal formed around the statue of Kai and Kurotobai that shook the earth. Kurotobai struck the ground with his staff and summoned the statue. Ikeboshi sat on his knees and could not believe his eyes. Right in front of him, the red diamond invader was awakening a ruthless huge statue. Ikeboshi thought in horror that sometimes gems were quite scary. The red diamond was a stone of wonders, and no one would have thought it could be used to create something so horrible at the whim of whoever controlled it. The stranger next to Kai smiled and touched the gem. The hero, meanwhile, was trying to combine the two materials. Eventually, the two diamonds joined together, and Kai said it was done. The guy stretched out his hand with the crystal and exclaimed joyfully that he had done it. From happiness, the hero fell right beside the mountain of gems. Kai was pleased and said he had polished them all. The stranger was delighted and told Kai that he had done a great job. The guy felt like he had been polishing them for 3 months, and it was quite strange that it had only been 2 days in the real world. At the same moment, there was a rumbling noise near them that caught their attention. Right from under the ground, that stone huge dragon appeared. He thought that the human child already knew the answer. The dragon wanted to know which stone was the most valuable, and was waiting for the Kai's answer. The kid rose to his feet and decided to give the dragon his answer. He thought that the most valuable thing was this whole mountain of stones. The dragon didn't understand what he meant, and the Kai said he wasn't trying to lead him on. Kai picked out each stone he polished. Also, the hero thought they had no significant value, and the people were the very ones who gave the stones that value. Nature did no such thing, and so if a Kai would give value to anything, it would be to his actions. The hero thought the value was in polishing each of these stones and held out a handful to the dragon. That is why each stone he polished was valuable. The dragon asked the boy why he had chosen all these stones. Kai remembered how he was once left on the side of the road. He willingly didn't want to give up any of them. The dragon understood and thought about Kai's words. After that, the entire mountain of rocks behind the guy glowed. The stones turned into light and headed straight for the hero's body. The dragon replied that his response was rather childish. However, he passed this test. The dragon decided that he would grant Kai the power to match his answer, and henceforth he stood on the gap between man and gem. Kai looked questioningly at the dragon and asked what he meant. The stranger congratulated Kai, knowing that he would pass this test. No sooner had he finished speaking than he felt sick and the stranger fell to the ground. He understood the feeling and knew someone was using him, but he didn't know who it could be. Kai worriedly reached out to his partner and asked if he was okay. The man asked Kai to calm down and listen to him carefully, because right now his world was in danger. Kai didn't understand what he was talking about, and the stranger said he would show him everything that was going on. He asked the hero to close his eyes, after which they touched each other's foreheads. Kai saw a huge stone statue in front of him that was destroying everything around him. The hero was terrified and did not understand what it was. He asked the stranger what this absurdly large thing was. It was a statue that the Kurotobai had summoned using Kai's red diamond. Kai didn't understand why the Kurotobai could use his red diamond. The fact was that by stepping into the gap between man and stone, Kai unknowingly allowed Kurotobai and the red diamond to connect. Ikeboshi was at this point on his last breath. His pigeon blood had already been almost completely eaten by the Kurotobai antimonite. In that case, the hero didn't understand the point of his ordeal, but his partner asked the Kai to calm down, for they still had hope. And if Kurotobai could control him, then that means Ikeboshi could too. Kai's teacher could also control the red diamond, which surprised the hero. Each artisan used a different ability of each stone. To be honest, the stranger wasn't sure which ability he could use. He apologized for everything happening so suddenly. Kai exclaimed that he believed him and asked to tell what he should do next. The unfamiliar guy with the blindfold pressed his lips together and agreed with Kai. He asked the hero to make a wish. Kai was to make a wish for the red diamond. Meanwhile, Kurotobai pointed his staff at the pigeon blood and told Ikeboshi that victory remained with him. But he asked Ikeboshi not to worry so much. After all, he would make sure that the artisan would turn to stone along with his apprentice. Ikeboshi only breathed heavily and realized that there was nothing he could do. Ikeboshi sat directly in front of the petrified statue of his apprentice and glanced disdainfully at Kurotobai. Kurotobai smirked at the expression on the artisan's face. It was as if it was telling him that he hadn't given up yet. At that moment, the petrified Kai statue lit up with a flash, which puzzled Kurotobai. Ikeboshi turned back and thought of what appeared to be a red diamond. Different diamonds shone in the stranger's hands, and he only asked the Kai to make a wish. Stones became precious stones due to people's wishes. Therefore, Kai only needed to make his wish. Simultaneously with his teacher, the hero reached for a dazzling flash of light. Kai's new acquaintance saw the teacher and student walking hand in hand. Kurotobai decided he had had enough and ordered Ikeboshi to stop his futile resistance. The stranger told the Kai that if his diamond ability was a reflection, then the next stage was inversion, and he could invert the power that turned him into stone. Kurotobai struck the Ikeboshi that was protecting the statue of the student with himself. Through the combination of their desires and their bond, they created a red miracle.